Hello everyone. I am the Midnight Narrator and I am here today to help you. I know you are using this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Write in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching this. Now get comfortable and relax. My fiance and I are from California, but her family lives in Colorado, and they own a cabin near Pikes Peak, way up in the mountains. After visiting them, they recommended we go stay at the cabin a few days. We are avid hikers and jumped at the opportunity. Colorado is very rich in Native American folk legend. Virtually every place you go used to belong to an indigenous community, and the few of them who remain keep the traditions and stories alive. Pikes Peak is no different. There are enough stories and gift shops to give anybody the sense that the land itself is alive. I don't know if this has anything to do with what is happening, but maybe someone here is from Colorado and could help us connect the dots. Faye and I are currently at the cabin. It's day 4 and we were planning on leaving today. But things have gotten very strange around here and it looks like we're going to be here a while longer. We have enough food for a winter and the heater is in stellar order, but the Wi-Fi is terrible at best and there is virtually no cell reception. We feel isolated. I will try to respond to comments, but the internet dips out for hours at a time up here. The first weird thing that happened was the snow. There was no snow in the forecast, so we packed light, but on first night here, just our luck, a blizzard pounded the whole area. My little Corolla is basically a brick of ice outside, and there's no way I'm going to try to make the 6-mile drive down the mountain to the town. I blame myself for trusting Colorado in spring. After a day, Thursday, of lovely hiking and sightseeing, some really unsettling stuff started happening. When we returned to the cabin just before dusk, we found an enormous dream catcher dangling from a tree about a dozen yards from the back door. This wasn't the kind you're imagining, the kind you buy from a novelty shop. This thing was made from twigs and twine, and it's about 3 feet in diameter. Absolutely humongous. Neither Faye nor I were stupid enough to touch it. We're veteran horror movie fans, and we know that's how you get cursed. That night while we were eating dinner, we heard a bunch of noises in the woods outside. Twigs crunching, leaves rustling, etc. This isn't unusual because we saw some elk and deer on our hike, but the sounds were slow and purposeful. They stopped and started and were rhythmic, like someone was casing the area in a crescent shape around the cabin. I used my really bright tactical flashlight to look outside from the porch, but there was nothing. We stayed in all day on Friday and just cuddled, hung out, played some of the board games we brought, and some of the Super Nintendo games they had in the cabin. Donkey Kong Country 2, I have considered stealing because it's the greatest game ever made. It snowed again, and after dark we started hearing more noises. Around 1 a.m., Faye woke me up and told me she was hearing a voice outside. I strained to listen, and I thought I could make out the sound of a man crying very far away. But his voice was drowned out by the wind, so I wasn't absolutely certain of what I heard. We went back to sleep, but again around 4:45 a.m., we heard him more distinctly and closer. He sounded like he was calling for help, but he would dip into another language that I've never heard before. We called the ranger station at the bottom of the hill using my cell phone, and they told us they'd get up there and check it out. We never saw them, and I doubt they ever came. On Saturday, shit got really scary. It snowed again in the morning, and I stopped getting service for most of the day. Faye and I watched movies and tried to Skype with her family, but that didn't work. She went to sleep early, around 8. While I did some photo editing on my laptop in the living room. She woke up crying hysterically. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she'd had a dream that she was lost in the woods outside, and something was following her. I cuddled with her until she fell back asleep, and eventually I drifted off too. Faye woke me up around 1 a.m. She was absolutely beside herself. I've never seen her so afraid in my life, and just the look on her face really unsettled me. She told me that she heard the man outside again, but she recognized the voice. She was absolutely convinced that it was her grandfather's voice and that he was wandering around outside begging for help. Faye's grandpa died when we were seniors in college 4 years ago. I told her that she was dreaming, but then I heard the voice too. I never met the guy, so I wouldn't recognize his voice, but it did sound different from the night before. It sounded older. I had to do everything I could to keep her from running off into the woods looking for him. Eventually, she realized that the possibility of it being him was absurd, so we put a movie on at a good volume and fell back asleep. My cell phone wouldn't connect a single call. What happened last night, Sunday, was the thing that has sent me over the edge. Essentially, the same thing happened. Around 1 a.m., at which point I was still awake, almost expecting the noise to happen, I heard a voice. This time, it was a woman's. Thankfully, it was distant enough that it didn't wake Faye. I walked into the bathroom and cracked the window open just a tiny bit. The frosty air that came through that crack seemed like a death sentence to me as a Californian. Nobody could survive outside for long in that, not without serious military-grade winter gear. And yet someone was wandering the fuck around out there, stepping on twigs and crying. I'm a reasonable, skeptical, sometimes arrogant agnost, but I'm telling you, the voice sounded exactly like my mother's. My mom is alive and well and living in Southern California, so my brain instantly cramped at the sound of her voice out here in the Rocky Mountains. I would know my mother's voice anywhere, I think we all would. And I'm telling you, I'm about 90% sure it was hers, which is way too sure to not scare the shit out of me. I grabbed my light and went outside with a blanket wrapped around me and my hiking boots on. I circled the entire cabin and looked around. There was snow pushed out of the way in a big, meandering pattern that snaked in and out of the tree line, like someone was drunkenly shuffling around. Maybe they were injured. The path went right up to the bathroom window and then back into the woods. Each time the voice called out, I shouted, "Mom," or "Who's there?" or "Who are you?" And each time the voice receded further into the woods. I'm pretty certain it was trying to coax me deeper and deeper into the forest, away from the cabin. I'm still alive because I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to die like some dumbass in a bad horror movie. I went back inside and made sure we were locked down tight. Since I can't call the ranger station, I tried to stay awake last night until 1 a.m., because over the past few nights, that is the approximate time the noises change from rustling branches cracking to voices. I didn't make it. I fell asleep on the couch with my laptop open, waiting for the Wi-Fi to come back. I think this was at about 12:30 a.m. I woke up right around 1:15 a.m. to a muffled voice. In my sleepy days, I struggled to figure out where it was coming from. I thought it was just outside the living room window, so I sat there quietly trying to make the words out. It was a woman's voice and said things like, "A few days, it's not mine, I'm not alone, okay?" I got up and peeked out the curtains and didn't see anyone, but then the voice said, "It's my parents' house," and I knew the voice was Faye's. As I mentioned earlier, my fiancée has an undiagnosed sleep disorder and has extensive sleep talk and sometimes sleepwalks. She has had pronounced night terrors since she was a little kid. I walked into the bedroom to find Faye, sleeping on her tummy as usual. She didn't say anything else as I came in. Two things really disturbed me about this situation, though. The first is that she appeared to be having a conversation with someone, which is actually quite common for her. But the person she was conversing with was interrogating her, asking her questions about herself, me, the cabin, etc. Second, in her sleep, Faye was imitating another voice. It wasn't hers that she was speaking with. She was altering the pitch and tone to sound like a different person. My modus operandi is to not wake her up when she has sleep disturbances. There's a story behind this. Expect one someday. Instead, I gently rub her back and hair, which calms her and puts her back to restful sleep. I did this for a few minutes, but then there was another noise, off in the distance outside. I got up and walked to the window to listen, and I think this was the first time that I really felt scared enough that I felt like we were in real danger. It was a child, singing in the dark. I couldn't really make out much of what he was saying, but I am certain that it was a child, probably age 6 to 8, trying to sing a song. The snow had abated for a while now, and the stars were notably bright, so I could see all the way to the rim of the forest, about 20 yards out. There was a figure standing there just past the first trees, back facing me, looking up at either the moon or the tops of the trees. It stood so still that I convinced myself it was a tree stump or something, and in a few minutes it was no longer visible. My skeptical nature compels me to be reasonable and say my eyes were playing tricks on me. When I turned around, Faye was sitting straight up in bed, eyes closed. She does this a lot in her sleep. She craned her neck and said something like, "Don't let them in," or "Don't let him inside." She was still doing the weird voice, so I woke her up. Faye and I sat in the bedroom with the lights on, talking about what we should do. I tried to get online to send an email to her parents, but of course it doesn't work when you need it. We agreed to stay in the same room and try to fall back asleep. At one point, I got up to get her some water. She hadn't vomited in several hours now and was feeling a lot better. And out the kitchen window, I saw flashes of pale light. They weren't like the flashes you'd see when someone walks through the woods with a flashlight. They were more like if someone had a lantern that they could slowly turn on and off. I flicked on the porch lights to the front and side of the house, hoping that it would discourage anyone from trying to approach. But as I walked back to the bedroom, I saw the distinct outline of a person through the window curtain in the living room. They were pressed against the glass with their hands on it, trying to peer inside. Since it was dark in the living room and bright outside, I could clearly see their silhouette. I shouted and approached the window, but the person ran off before I pulled the curtain open. Faye slept soundly, but I continued to hear voices outside. Different ones, on and off all night until dawn. I wrote several of them down. I couldn't sleep, so I camped out in the living room. I kept the bedroom door open so I could hear Faye if she started talking again. The voices would go away for hours and then start back up again. At one point I fell asleep because I was awoken by the sound of a light switch flicking on and off. From the couch I could see light from outside, going on and off in patterns of 5. I can't explain why this disturbed me so much, but it did. And I imagined some kind of horrible creature standing in my house somewhere, flipping the switch up and down and smiling. My first instinct was to check on Faye, and I nearly had a heart attack when I saw that she wasn't in bed. I started calling her name and pacing around the house, looking out the windows to see if she was outside. When I looked out the kitchen window, there she was, sitting on the hood of my car about 30 feet out in the driveway. Her back was to me and she was staring off into the forest. She was absolutely rigid, just the way she sits up in bed when she's asleep. Faye has sleepwalked all over the house back home in California. I found her in the kitchen and the downstairs hallway and the living room, but she's never gone outside. I shouted her name from the kitchen, but the second I did, Faye jumped off my car and dashed into the woods at full sprint. She never looked back at me. I started flipping out and screaming her name over and over. I scrambled to grab my boots to go after her, but the second I pulled the front door open, Faye called out my name from behind. She was standing in the hall looking confused, asking me what was wrong. Apparently she had been in the bathroom. In my masculine crusade, I'd forgotten to check there. I looked out at my car and into the forest, and honestly, the first thought that came to my mind was, "You clever motherfucker." Needless to say, we stayed up the remaining few hours until dawn, intermittently writing down the voices we heard, which faded away and became less frequent with the passage of time. I'll try to get the recordings up in a few days. For now, here is that list of voices we heard. We recalled some of the voices from the previous nights from memory, but I just figured you'd like to know what was being said throughout the duration of this lovely cabin experience. I will return to Colorado, but fuck Pikes Peak. The indicate that the words were very unclear. A man's voice, vaguely familiar but couldn't put a face to it, over the past several nights. Hello? Oh, God, look at it, look! Hello? Desperate. Don't. They see in the dark. Kind of wailed dramatically. I'm lost. Wachu, wolemai. Growled hacking sound reminded me of Gollum. It's very dark, I see those lights, shouted in anger. I'll come down there, shouted. Don't smile, I see you. Could have been goat smile. A woman's voice sounded age 20-ish last night. Gasp in horror, surprise over and over. Lay it on the ground and burn, turn it. La 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 la, la 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 la. Monotone, not melodic at all. She talks in her sleep. She's talking to me now. Threatening, malicious voice. A child sounded about 6 to 8 years old, indeterminate sex, last night. Crying, whining, occasional laughter. Oh, sol me I do, why do I do? Eat, I am a back and act, sol me I do. Singing, not sure if this is actually English or if my mind is just forcing the sounds into English. When do we go inside? When do we go inside? Unusual intonation. Sounded like a robot trying to mimic a child. Voice of my mother, a few nights ago. Stop. Laughing, joking. She has a recognizable Bostonian accent. Look at the windows. Did you see it? Voice of Faye's grandfather a few nights ago. Lots of indiscernible groaning, calls for help. Something about the war. They's bodies still in the ground there. Never found them, but they're there. Right here. Ooh, they found it. Oh, I'm standing in the same place, 20 years. By the way, I forgot to check to see if that dream catcher was still there out back. You're welcome to drive out there and look for yourself, though. So that night we sat down with Faye's mom, Laura, in her bedroom. while her dad was watching the news downstairs. Her mom was so upset at the stories we told her. I mean, she was visibly disturbed to the point of being in tears. She kept apologizing to Faye and hugging her. Laura told us that they'd purchased that cabin from their good friend, Jennifer, I think, who moved to Nevada about 20 years ago, and that Jennifer and her husband had complained about all sorts of weird experiences while living there. Her husband Tom, like myself, was fond of hiking and exploring the woods, and collected tons of arrowheads and other neat trinkets he'd found on his travels around Pikes Peak. But Jennifer started having dreams about Tom being dragged off into the woods from their bedroom. She had all kinds of horrific nightmares about him being skinned and pinned up in the trees like some kind of macabre artwork. Jennifer said that while Tom was at work, she would occasionally hear the voice of her daughter, who died in childhood of some kind of bone cancer, calling Mommy from the edge of the forest. Jennifer's doctors claimed it was the medication she was on and changed her meds. Tom got a new job in Vegas, and they basically noped out of there. On a lighter note, Tom hanged himself in the garage 2 years after they moved. No note or anything. Anyway, Laura, Faye's mom, and Greg, Faye's dad, only used the cabin as a getaway in summers. Laura never experienced anything beyond weird feelings while she was there, and she chalked that up to all of the crazy stories Jennifer had told her. Greg, however, who suffers from PTSD-related nightmares occasionally, experienced exacerbated sleep disturbances in the cabin. Over the years, he became reluctant to go there, and claimed that all of the things he'd seen in Vietnam came back to him when he slept there. Allegedly, some of the people he saw get killed would come back to talk to him in his dreams at that cabin. The last time he stayed there, he woke up in a dream to find a few of them sitting in his bedroom with him, maimed, rotted, etc. He privately maintained to Laura that he also heard their voices in the forests crying, begging, screaming for their mothers, etc. Oh, and guess what time he always heard them? Laura told us that she honestly did not believe there was anything really wrong with the cabin. Faye was extremely pissed and let her have it. They kind of ended our visit on a bad note. Later that night, I was up reading and Faye was sleeping next to me. She always falls asleep before me. That girl could fall asleep on a pile of rocks. She started mumbling in her sleep, so I listened carefully, and here are a few things I heard her say. Never, never, never. Number I wouldn't. On the mountain, I can't. Why? His name? We don't know you. No, it's Felix, my name. About 2 hours later, she woke me up by nudging me in her sleep and saying, "Tell the man in the hall to leave." This set me over the edge, so I got to go to the bathroom and get some water. I didn't find anything strange. Had a very hard time falling asleep, though. This morning, we heard back from the guy who went up to the cabin to check it for gas leaks/carbon monoxide, at the behest of a few scrupulous Redditors. The guy mentioned that radon is a really big problem in some of these old places in the mountains. He's some kind of super badass handyman with all kinds of equipment, so he wrangled up one of the peak rangers and they went up to the place together. Apparently there were tracks all around the house, a dozen pairs of them, like a large group of people had been wandering around looking in the windows. All of the windows and doors were sealed the way we left them. When they got inside, some stuff was moved around. The silverware drawer was emptied onto the kitchen floor and turned upside down. The power was completely dead. The weirdest thing was that there was water all over the bed and on the floor, but our guy checked for leaks in the ceiling and the bathroom pipes. Nothing. Nothing had been stolen from the house, not even food. Some of the old clothes in the bedroom closet were strewn on the ground, but nothing stolen. Like maybe someone was trying them on, smelling them. The ranger said that there were legends about the mountain, something about things that sort of act like people. But they come out of the old abandoned mines. Greg's friend couldn't remember the name the ranger gave them. It was in a native language. I asked Greg to ask the ranger about the sounds I heard, specifically the wachu, wachu, wolemai, and he said it's a widely recognizable chant, but he doesn't know what it means. Anyone here have any idea? No radon, no carbon monoxide, and no gas. The place is all electric. He checked for mold, but said it was unlikely that there would be any all the way up there. He did say it's possible that there's some kind of electrical problem, and that this can sometimes cause people to feel very unsettled and maybe have hallucinations. He has some kind of Geiger counter or a gadget that detects issues like this, but it was broken when he tried to use it. I'm going to keep a close eye on Faye. She's still shaken up about all this. Faye and I flew back from Colorado on Wednesday afternoon. She slept the entire flight despite the noise, which amazed me. I can't sleep on planes because I'm absolutely terrified of flying. I'd rather stay another night in that cabin. When we got home, I ordered a pizza and she wolfed it down. Her appetite has returned in full force, which is great news. Faye has an undiagnosed sleep disorder. She has pronounced night terrors, sleep talking, and occasional sleepwalking. This disorder lies dormant 90% of the time, but it tends to flare up when she's under a lot of stress. If we're moving, if she's changing jobs, or if a relative dies, I can expect a night of horrifying talking and odd behavior. Needless to say, our experiences at the cabin have set Faye on edge. Although she's in high spirits, she's still afraid at night. I am too. That night after pizza, she fell asleep on the couch while we watched Wedding Crashers. At around 10 p.m., the movie ended and I turned the TV off. As I brought our plates to the kitchen, I passed by the stairwell and heard a faint noise from upstairs that sounded like a man sighing. I shrugged it off and woke Faye up. We brushed our teeth and went to bed. Faye talked in her sleep a lot that night, and it started at about 1 a.m. I woke up to her calling out, "What did you do? And do you need help?" and laughing. This isn't really unusual for her. She babbled occasionally, said a few funny things, etc. I woke up again around 4 and heard her talking, but this time, she was doing something she's never done before. We've been together for almost 5 years, and not once has she ever whispered in her sleep. But now she was whispering with her back turned to me. For a second, I thought someone was lying on the floor at her edge of the bed, talking back to her. This disturbed the shit out of me, so I sat up and leaned over her, trying to listen in the dark. The only thing I heard her say discernibly was, "Shh." I asked her, "Faye, what are you talking about?" And she didn't respond. I said, "Who are you talking to?" And she replied, "Don't," and nudged me. Another unusual thing happened. At about 5:45 a.m., I woke up to Faye getting back into bed. She hurried into the bedroom from the hall and got back into bed quickly, making zero attempt not to wake me. First of all, Faye does not get up. Ever. She sleeps like a dead horse, and even if she went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, which she never does, the bathroom is not down the hall, it's in our bedroom. When I asked her what she was doing the next morning, she claimed to have no memory of it. I spent all day Thursday thinking about why Faye was still acting weird. I was the one who found the dream catcher and got close to it. I was the one who interacted with the voices at the cabin. And then I remembered something. On our last night in Colorado, at her parents' house, Faye got back into bed at around the same time, 5:45 a.m. I barely remembered because I was half asleep, but the image returned to my head. She'd been getting up really early for a few days. So last night, I set my phone's alarm to vibrate, and I put the time to 4:45 a.m. In the middle of the night, Faye started talking again. This time she was doing the same thing she did at the cabin, changing her voice to sound like someone else. In 5 years, she's sleep-talked a bunch, but has never whispered or changed her voice until recently. She said a few things, which I tried to commit to memory. La, la, la. Flat monotone. Sik, sa. More like a sharp exhale, followed by day on or tayal. Over and over. He's still in the trees. Where were you? I looked for you and, ooh, it's time. About the same time, I heard a noise outside, which sounded like an old man grumbling to himself about something. We live in Norcal, in a really woodsy town, so when you look out our bedroom window, there are tons of trees across the street. It was very dark, but I'm fairly certain I saw a man walking behind the first line of trees. He was too far away to be the one grumbling, but it is very unusual to see anyone over there this time of night. In fact, I have never seen anyone there at night, ever. Looking outside required me to open the curtains, which lit up our room with moonlight. When I looked back at the bed, Faye was lying there with her neck craned toward me, her eyes crazy wide and fixed on me, and her mouth was open. She issued this really frightening, gurgly, drawn-out groan and flicked her tongue around. It looked like an epileptic fit in slow motion. Faye has definitely opened her eyes in her sleep, but never like this. She looked like a fucking murderer. I got so scared I called her name really loud and woke her up. She was confused and asked me why I was at the window. I lied and said I was just closing it because it was cold. I didn't want her to know I'd heard a voice. We talked a bit, but I'll skip that because this is getting long. My alarm woke me up at 4:45 a.m., and I laid there awake, waiting for Faye to get up like she had been the past few nights. She breathes very rhythmically when she's asleep, so I can always tell how deep she's under. At around 5:20, she sat straight up, swung her legs out of the bed, and tiptoed down the hall. I followed behind. When I say that my fiancé tiptoed, I don't mean like a child on Christmas Eve. This was robotic, alien, inhuman. She moved like a meth-addicted ballerina zombie down the hall and stopped at the stairwell. Her breathing never changed. I just stood there in our bedroom, poking my head out into the dark hall. Faye looked down the stairs, still standing rigidly on the balls of her feet, swaying to and fro slightly. She did some weird shit. She touched her face slowly for several minutes, touched the banister, touched the wall, flicked the light on and off a few times, all the while maintaining her perfectly regular coma breathing. Then she reached an arm out in the motion of a bicep curl, stretching her fingers and wiggling them, then curling them, her hand and her arm back up to her face. I watched her do this motion for about 4 minutes. It looked like she was testing the limb, as if she'd never used it before. But then I realized she was actually communicating with someone on the first floor of the house. She was making a come-hither motion. With full confidence that Faye was sleepwalking, I walked into the hall and leaned over the half wall that overlooks the living room. It was totally dark down there. I couldn't see anything but the clock on the cable box. Faye stood there waving, smiling, making gestures, and then touching her face and pulling gently on her hair. I carefully ushered her back to bed and talked to her softly, trying not to actually wake her. She didn't resist, she never does, and went back to sleep without another word. I have zero clue what the fuck is going on. I told her this morning what she did, and now we have a doctor's appointment for her at 3 p.m. today. I took Faye to see her doctor yesterday, and we hesitantly explained what was going on with her. I left out the paranormal stuff because I didn't want to get put in a ward. She seemed really concerned about Faye, ordered a blood test, gave her a physical, asked her about her diet and drugs, medications, etc. Faye and I are both non-drinkers, non-drug users, and neither of us are on medication. She wants Faye to be evaluated by a psychiatrist next week. For now, she gave her a sedative at night and some anti-anxiety medication. She wants us to get some fresh air and get out of the house, so we're going on a hike today. A Redditor named Pixie Dix brought up the possibility that the child's voice outside the cabin asking, "When do we go inside? When do we go inside?" might not refer to inside the cabin, but rather inside Faye. This really worries me because it corroborates some of the strange behavior she's been exhibiting in her sleep. I contacted the park ranger, who is pretty sympathetic to our situation, and he's going to get in touch with some of the members of his tribe who have experience with spiritual guidance and medicine. He is convinced that Faye and I have attracted the attention of the ones who come out of the mines. Lucky us, more on that later. Some Redditors have recommended that I test Faye to see if it's really her. So yesterday evening, against my wallet's advice, I took her to our favorite steakhouse. I only ever order one meal there. Medium tri-tip, house macaroni and cheese, and a bottled root beer. Faye only ever orders one meal there too. The BBQ chicken sandwich with mac cheese and a salad with ranch dressing and a Coke. She drinks Coke only. Her blood is mostly Coca-Cola. Faye took a long time deciding what to order, and ended up ordering a fucking New York strip. I jokingly told her to order for me too, and she said, "I don't know what you want." She also ordered water instead of Coke. Usually we have arguments over how much Coke she drinks, and how I'm always trying to get her to hydrate better and just drink water. This was really unsettling to me. At the end of the night, when we were walking back to my car, I kissed her temple and asked if she still liked it when I called her Noodle. She said, "Of course. I've never called her Noodle in my entire life." Her nickname has always been Monkey Toes. Long story. When we got home, she cracked open a Coke and got on Facebook, which is completely normal for her. This threw me off. One thing that's been on my mind lately is the song the little kid was singing outside the cabin. For those of you who don't know, in the middle of the night at this cabin in Colorado, we heard a child's voice coming out of the forest, singing an eerie song. I've been catching myself humming it almost every day. Ooh, sol mi do. I asked Faye if it meant anything to her, and I sang it to her while she was sitting on the couch. After a few repetitions, she sort of went blank, like she was hypnotized, and just wobbled back and forth ever so slightly for about 8 seconds, then snapped out of it and said, "I don't remember that." Last night is when the shit hit the fan. I haven't gotten a full night's rest in over a week now, and it's starting to make me feel over-emotional and crazy. Faye started murmuring in her sleep around 1 as usual, but I couldn't understand much of it. She sat up in bed, took the sheets off her legs like she was going to get up, but I grabbed her arm and asked her what she was doing. She said, "Tell them to leave." Her eyes were completely shut. I asked her, "Who? Who needs to leave?" She sat there for about 2 minutes, not speaking, just sitting straight up. I asked again, and she replied, "There's a man at the door." Then about 10 seconds later, "And a woman at the bottom of the stairs." Of course, this made every single hair on my entire body bristle. I got up and went downstairs, turning on every single light as I went and carrying my buck knife with me. Nobody was in our house. I looked in every single room downstairs and even in the backyard. When I got back to the stairwell, I heard someone stomping around upstairs. Someone had turned the light to the upstairs hallway off. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up, trying to listen, but the noises stopped. So I walked back up into our bedroom and got back into bed. It was likely that Faye had gotten up to go to the bathroom or sleepwalked a bit in the room and went back to bed. I fell asleep pretty fast, but woke up again only a few minutes later. Faye was gone. I heard movement down the hall, so I looked out into it and I saw Faye coming out of the other bedroom. She staggered down the hall toward me, then stopped, turned around, and walked back in the other direction. She did this 7 to 8 times. She was walking in almost the same way as the night before, standing really high up on her toes, her legs totally rigid like they were made of cement, and her arms completely limp and flopping back and forth. It was extremely fucking terrifying seeing her move like that. She was totally graceless. It was like someone was testing out a human body for the first time. At that same moment, I heard a noise through the bedroom window and ran over to check, thinking someone was really at the front door. You can see down to the front entryway from our bedroom window. Off in the distance, about 30 yards out, somebody was walking back and forth in the exact same way that Faye was. He was humming loudly and intermittently singing. The song sounded like the one I sang to Faye earlier, the one the child sang outside the cabin. I made this YouTube video explaining what happened. Basically, I ran back into the hall, woke Faye up, and brought her downstairs. I opened the front door to get a better look at the man, but he was gone. Today, at the behest of a few Redditors, I asked Faye if she'd ever been to that cabin before we visited it. I don't know why I never thought to ask her this before. She said nothing about it when we stayed there for several nights. She was hesitant to answer me and eventually admitted that she'd been there once when she was 14. She and her parents went snowshoeing up the mountain. A few hours later, I emailed her mother and asked the same question. She told me Faye had gone to the cabin multiple times as a child, but stopped going when she went into high school. I can't figure out which one of them is lying to me. I haven't told Faye this, but I'm thinking of going back to the cabin and meeting with the ranger. He wants to do some ritual with the dream catcher we found, if it's still there. And he says he will bring his friends and try to cleanse the house and the surrounding area. This will cost me like $500 just to fly out there. But if this shit gets any worse, it might be worth it. I cannot tell you how much all of your support has meant to us over the past few days. Faye feels so good knowing that people are constantly asking about her health. And I feel like a few of your suggestions have literally saved her life. So thank you, from the bottom of my heart. I don't even know where to begin. So much has happened in the last 2.5 days. The sedatives and anti-anxiety meds the doctor gave to Faye worked during the day, and she has been less stressed. However, at night, her behavior is still highly unusual. I have taken the overwhelming consensus of Redditors seriously. I went out and purchased a bunch of child-proofing materials for the house to prevent Faye from harming herself or going outside while sleepwalking. I could not afford a bunch of cameras. Sorry, I'm a teacher. I bought these knob covers that little kids and hopefully sleepwalkers are too stupid to figure out outlet covers in case she tries to jam anything into them, and I hid the kitchen knives. I also brought in a spiritual healer after very carefully searching for one. It is my opinion that 99% of them are frauds and hucksters, but this woman did not charge us anything, and she was recommended by close family. She is the daughter of a Shoshone tribal elder. The long and short of it is she believes our house is not haunted. However, she says that Faye feels very off. She said she couldn't get a good read on her at all, and that there is a dark cloud over her. Still suspicious of this woman, I took her to a random upstairs window and told her that I had seen something outside near the edge of the woods, mimicking Faye's sleepwalking, which was true, but I pointed out the wrong window to the wrong part of the forest. She quietly examined the other windows upstairs and said that our bedroom window, the correct one, gave her a terrible feeling. She said, "He watches from here. She can hear him whispering at night." We told her everything. She was horrified by our story. The look on her face unsettled me so much, it was like she'd never heard of anything this bad. She went out of the room and had to collect herself downstairs. The woman prayed for several minutes, sang a beautiful song in a language I can't even begin to describe, and saged our entire house. She put some kind of crushed herbs on the ground in front of the 2 doors that lead into our home. Then she told me in private, "You are dealing with the hollow ones." She said its name, her ancestral language, but I can't even come close to remembering spelling it. She said that one is infatuated with Fae and will do absolutely anything to get inside our house, but the process takes time. I don't know if I actually buy any of this, but at least she didn't sell it to me. We also had Faye take a pregnancy test, as recommended by many Redditors. The woman said it was a good idea. Good news, not pregnant. And the woman stood in the bathroom with her like a prison guard so she couldn't fuck with the test. We then thanked the woman and she left. That night we attached a little jingle bell from Faye's Christmas-themed lingerie to a hair scrunchie and put it around her ankle. I'm such a light sleeper, there's no way she'd be able to get out of bed without waking me. Faye fell asleep really fast due to the meds, out like a light in a few minutes. I lay in bed thinking about the 5 she wrote on the window in her sleep a few nights earlier, and reasoned that it meant 5 a.m. and not 5 days, as some Redditors had speculated. This makes sense because she's been getting up at that time to sleepwalk every night for 4 nights now. Since the 5 was written backwards, facing the backyard, I reasoned that it was a signal to whoever, whatever was out there. She was going to try to let it inside. I eventually fell asleep and I had a fucking horrifying dream. Something came into the house through the sliding glass door to the yard and walked up the stairs and into our bedroom. It sat at the edge of our bed, rubbing Faye's foot and staring at us. It was completely wreathed in shadow. I couldn't see it at all except for a silhouette. I woke up soaked in sweat and couldn't fall back asleep for a while. 5 a.m. rolled around, and the reliable little jingle bell woke me right up. In her sleep, Faye did something she's never done before. She stood up on the bed, rigid as a board, and stared out the window. I shouldn't really say stared because her eyes were closed, but she was alert, watching, listening. She remained there like a statue for at least 5 minutes. I also didn't move. I just watched. Then she slowly raised her hand and started waving at someone outside. My skin crawled when she did that. She definitely knew someone was there, even with her eyes shut. Faye then stepped off the bed and darted to the bedroom door, trying to get out into the hallway, but the child-proof knob cover stopped her. She couldn't figure it out in her sleep. She did another thing she's never done while sleepwalking. She got extremely angry and started pulling on the cover. She shrieked and growled like a trapped animal. After about 30 seconds of this, she woke herself up. She started crying really hard and told me that in her nightmares, she had seen a man without a face, walking through the halls of our home, whispering her name and looking for her. I sat up and talked with her for an hour, and then we went back to sleep. When I woke up again, it was around 10 a.m., April 24th, and Faye was gone. The bedroom window was open. As I walked downstairs, I saw her in the backyard reading. Every single window in the entire house was open, and it was like 55 degrees outside. She told me the smell of the sage made her nauseous, and she wanted to get it out of the house. I couldn't smell anything. I suggested that we go to the church downtown today to speak with a priest. She's Catholic, but she refused, so I had my buddy Kay, who is a very, very devout Catholic, come over with some holy water and his crucifix. Apparently, Kay told his priest what was going on, and the guy very reluctantly blessed the water and told us to call him. Faye was irritated that I'd done this without her permission, and waited outside while Kay set up a few little crosses and his big crucifix around the house. Faye refused to have any holy water put on her. She kept saying, "I'm freezing, don't you dare." She's going to be super pissed when she finds out I put that shit in her shampoo and conditioner bottles. She was in a really nasty mood all morning, but after we went out for lunch, she was feeling better, and agreed to film the interview video and answer questions from Redditors. While filming, I noticed that she wasn't wearing her engagement ring, and realized she hadn't been wearing it in several days. I asked her where it was, and she said it was in our luggage, which we've now only partially unpacked. Later, when I checked, it wasn't there. I'm worried about this for a few reasons. I've finally begun moving some more of the photos from the cabin onto my laptop too. I cannot bring myself to listen to those voice recordings yet. Since this is getting over long, flash forward to last night. I got up at about 1 a.m. to pee, and I knocked the bell scrunchie off the bed. Faye had taken it off and was gone. I got angry and scared at the same time. I found her sitting on the stairs, looking down into the dark, spreading her arms open like she was trying to get a child to climb the staircase for its first time. She was smiling with her eyes closed. As I usually do, I gently got her up and walked her back to bed. When I laid down next to her, she leaned over and with her eyes still closed said, "They're gonna kill you," and then licked my face. I called her parents today to arrange a flight back to Colorado. They're paying for it. Her mom, Laura, admitted to me that something had happened to Faye as a child at the cabin. That is where her sleep disturbances started, when she was 5. I have had enough, and they can tell. They spoke with the ranger at Pikes Peak again, and he's arranging for me to meet with him and his buddies from their tribe who knows the entire history of the area and all of the hauntings that other visitors have reported. Faye will be staying with my 2 best friends, R and Jay's fiancée, A. I've known all 3 of them since high school, and they are completely informed about all these events. They will guard her with their lives. In short, I'm going back to the cabin alone. It has been an interesting few days. I have so much to say, so I'm going to try to be terse. Sorry that it's taken so long to report. I really am trying. All of your questions and analysis of these events have really helped us through this struggle. Some of your observations are what brought me back here to Colorado. I landed in Denver International Airport 2 nights ago and stayed with Faye's parents in Arvada. While there, we all sat down, and I basically forced them to tell me what was going on. A Redditor pointed out that Laura, Faye's mom, appeared to be lying, hiding something. Another Redditor asked me if Faye had ever been to the cabin before, since her family owned it for almost 3 decades. I had never even thought of this. When I asked Faye, she said no, and that her parents just used it as a getaway a few times a year. Faye's mom told me that she'd been there multiple times when she was little. This time, Faye's parents told me a different story. They claimed this was the truth. Faye had been to the cabin as a toddler a few times, and when she was 5, something happened to her. While Greg, Faye's dad, and Faye were outside playing in the snow, Faye wandered off toward the edge of forest to look in. She was following a voice. Greg was building a snowman and keeping his eye on her. They were only a few dozen yards apart. Allegedly, Greg heard Faye talking, answering questions, but he couldn't hear anyone else talking. He started walking toward her to bring her back, and he heard her say, "Faye." "No, it's Faye. I can't see you." A moment later, little Faye began shrieking and crying. She went stiff as a board, and Greg had to pick her up and haul her back inside. She was almost catatonic and would go through bouts of total silence or inconsolable hysterics for several hours, until Greg and Laura decided to go back down the mountain and take her to a hospital. Greg claims he never saw anyone in the woods, and never heard any voices speaking to Faye. The doctors thought she had an epileptic seizure, and to this day, Faye does not remember ever going to the cabin. When I took her, she acted like she'd never seen it before. I believe that if Faye did remember being traumatized as a child, she'd never want to go back. So I really think she's blocked out the whole experience. And when we visited it a week ago, she thought it was her first time going. In Laura and Greg's subsequent visits to the cabin without Faye, Greg experienced terrible nightmares in which dead people entered the bedroom and sat on the ground in bed, watching him sleep. In the morning, Greg let me borrow his truck, but refused to go to the cabin with me. He told me when I left, "We let you kids go up there because we honestly wanted to believe there was nothing actually wrong with the place. They used us to validate their denial, but I don't hold them responsible. I'd never have believed any of this if I were them. Dreams and a frightened child do not a haunting make. I arrived in Pikes Peak around 1 p.m. yesterday, and the ranger met me at the cabin. We investigated the place and didn't find anything unusual, except that a single lampshade had been removed from one of the lamps and placed on the couch. We checked out the nearby woods. I was kind of surprised to discover that the creepy, enormous dream catcher was still there. The ranger told me he did not recognize it, and it was not something that his people made. He told me not to mess with it until his friends showed up. He told me he'd return with them in the morning and left. That night, some shit happened. Greg told me that he'd hidden a .357 Magnum in the closet, so I retrieved it, and a really dope-ass purple bathrobe, and felt a little better. Don't worry, I know how to shoot and how to keep it safe. Right around sunset, I walked out to Greg's truck to grab a few things I'd neglected to bring in earlier, and I heard 2 distinct voices chattering in the woods. It was snowing like crazy and the wind was howling. But above the storm, I heard a gruff, masculine voice and a younger, adolescent male voice. They were both yammering incomprehensible gibberish from 2 different places. I hurried back inside and locked the door. The stuff they were saying was pure madness. It made no sense. "Put them up! Up there in the trees!" And take, walk on down there, go ahead. I just sat there imagining psychotic cannibals jabbering with their tongues hanging out and eyes rolled back in their skulls. I figured they'd come out of the woods as soon as it was dark. I tried to reach out to Faye back home, but my phone wouldn't get any reception in the cabin. The storm was too strong. I tried to play video games on the SNES, but I was so distracted by all of the sounds outside. Every single noise the blizzard produced caught my ear, and so my imagination manifested all kinds of horrifying creatures slinking around out there in the dark. When I finally went to bed, the wind died down a bit, and I heard a few more voices. There was a distant, high-pitched wail that echoed across the entire mountain. There was a child crying, saying something like, "Put me down in the hole, and it's so deep you can crawl forever." But his voice sort of glitched. It would suddenly become deeper, as though a grown man were doing an impression of a little kid. I also heard someone hacking and vomiting and crying, begging for help. I didn't fall for any of it. I'm 28 years old, and this is the most afraid I've ever been in my entire life, even with Faye walking around like a fleshy marionette and calling out to a presence in the dark of my own home. Around the time I was getting into bed, approximately 12:45 a.m., there was a gentle tapping sound on the window in the living room. It was soft, like a neighbor who was reluctant to bother me. I stood there in the bedroom with the door open, holding my breath, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. Then I heard it again, so I crept down the short hall and peeked around the corner, just in time to see a figure walking past the windows and toward the front door. With the curtains drawn, I couldn't make out anything but a big shadow. Then it knocked on the door. It was a gentle knock. A man's voice called out softly, "Hello?" I just listened intently and tried to keep silent. Eventually he knocked again and said, "Hello? I need to speak with you." He was speaking through clenched teeth. He was either extremely cold or extremely angry. I very carefully stepped back into the bedroom to grab the gun, but the goddamn place is so old the doors creak. I barely tapped the bedroom door as I passed, and it squealed like a dying pig. Then the man outside said, just above a whisper, "I know you're there." For just a moment in my lethargy, I considered the possibility that this was one of the ranger's friends, or maybe somebody else who lived on the mountain. I was never going to open the door, but stupidly I figured talking to it couldn't hurt. I say it because I immediately stopped believing there was a human being on the other side of the door the moment I opened my mouth. I said, "Who the fuck is it?" as assertively as I could. The second I stopped talking, whoever it was out there repeated my question while mimicking my voice accurately. It almost sounded like an echo. Then he said, "May I come in? Please?" His voice was a little shaky, but it definitely sounded like me, unnervingly similar to me. But he was still clenching his teeth, so I could hear the difference. I pointed the gun at the door. It was dark in the house, so he couldn't see what I was doing through the curtain, and said, "If you don't get the fuck out of here right now, I'll blow you in half." For those of you who don't know what a .357 can do to a person, a slug to the chest essentially makes you into a human milkshake, and that's after passing through 2 inches of oak door. We both just stood there for a dreadfully long minute. It started testing out my voice, groaning and whispering and muttering. It said a lot of things, but I only remember a few of them. "What's your name? What's your name? A little cabin for the weekend, for and then a bunch of lip smacking and chewing noises. They're lying, the ones out there, la 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 la. Not singing, but just flailing his tongue around and making noises like a child would. You aren't alone in there, and I'm not alone out here. What's your name? And you go up in the trees or down in the hole. That's where you go. Oh, they'll find you. Either way." The sound of my own voice making these horrific noises and phrases set every inch of my skin on fire. I can hardly describe the physical sensation of fright this intense. It was almost like having a bad fever, hot and cold and wet and sticky all at the same time. I shouted for it to leave and said I was armed. I considered firing off a round, but that's a decision you can't take back, and my #1 rule is to only fire when I'm certain I've got a target and a clear reason. I am proud to say that I can use my voice a lot better than whatever it was that mimicked me. I'm a soft-spoken guy, but I came down like a fucking hurricane screaming, "I will fucking kill you." He replied simply in a softer tone of my own voice, "I will fucking kill you." Then it went back to babbling gibberish and knocking politely on the door over and over and over. After another minute or two, it suddenly stopped. The last thing it said was, "I know where she is." Then it kicked the door, and I mean harder than any human could possibly kick a door, and ran off. The boom was so loud I couldn't believe the door didn't implode in its frame. The person thing bounded down the wooden patio and off into the snow, and I swear on my life and honor, it sounded like a horse or some other huge four-legged animal charging off into the woods. A child's laughter rang out, and then everything was silent. Needless to say, I remained in a cat-like state of delirious paranoia for the rest of the night. The storm picked back up, and I did not hear anything else. I spent the whole night debating whether the thing at the door was talking about Faye. I tried to convince myself that it was just yammering more nonsense like all the voices I've heard up here, but the way it spoke that sentence haunts me even now as I write this. Its voice, my voice, was purposeful and restrained. It chose the words carefully, and it knew exactly what to say. I've been thinking a lot about what Redditors have been saying about Faye being some kind of doppelganger. When I first saw the nude woman on my car, I thought it was a trick to lure me into the woods where the voices lie. I thought the real Faye stopped me from leaving the cabin. But many of you have pointed out that the reverse could be entirely possible, given how the Faye I took home to California is behaving, given how she has failed all of my tests, and given how her engagement ring has been missing since we got home. So I sat there for hours considering whether I should go out into the woods during broad daylight to search for my fiancée. Of course it is a stupid idea, but now I understand why people in horror movies do idiotic things. If I'm not looking for her or for answers, why am I here? I need to know what I saw that day in the driveway. I need to know if there are many voices or just one, and I need to know how to get all this back to normal. I listened to music on my iPod and desperately tried to distract myself by reading news articles online until daybreak. Most of them wouldn't load, because the gods of internet have cursed this cabin. Around 4 a.m., I got up to get some food from the kitchen, and I opened the window curtain a tiny bit to see if anything was going on outside. A ton of snow had fallen. At the rim of the forest, dozens of yards out, I could see a distant figure standing perfectly still in the moonlight. He was facing away, staring off into the darkness of the woods. I checked on him every 20 minutes since then. He never moved. When the sun rose around 6:15 a.m., he was gone. I never saw his face. Today, the ranger and his two buddies came to the cabin as promised. They were instantly likable and warm. One of them, T-Way, pronounced T-Way, is a medicine man in his 60s, and was especially cool. The other was his son Nathan, who was probably just a few years older than me. They told me all kinds of interesting lore about Pikes Peak and surrounding areas, and then proceeded to tell me a disturbing story that they believe explains the strange activity on the mountain. The ranger gave me one of his facility's satellite phones to stay in contact with him in case of emergencies. I used it to call Faye, but she didn't answer, so I called Jason and Richard, who are presently caring for her. Apparently Faye had become inexplicably outraged after taking a shower, threw an enormous tantrum, and locked herself in our bedroom. She refused to eat for the rest of the night. Allison and Jason slept in the guest room, and Richard slept on our couch downstairs, and worked late on his commissions. He's a digital artist. He told me that around 1 a.m., the same time I had my visitor, Faye ran downstairs into the kitchen, eyes closed, and started drinking out of the sink faucet. Then she turned around and stared, eyes still shut, at Richard while he sat at the breakfast table. She said, "Felix," to which he replied, "He's in Colorado, Faye. Remember?" And then she said, "We sent him there to die." Then she sat down right there on the kitchen tiles and went back to sleep. I've instructed my friends only to wake Faye if she does anything serious, so they observed my rules and got her back in bed without much of an issue. For all the crazy shit Faye does when she's asleep, at least she never gets violent. The guys put her back into bed easily enough. The next day, Allison bailed on the whole project. She said she was awake all night listening to Faye whispering through the wall. Faye told Allison about how there was a man in the house, and he was asking about her. My flight home is the day after tomorrow, so I'm going to have to figure all this shit out real quick. I'm going to take a nap. It's nice and bright outside. No voices. Good night. T-Way is an incredible storyteller. He told me that Pikes Peak and the surrounding area was inhabited by the Ute, Manitou, Arapaho, Pueblo, Anasazi, and other Native American groups at various times. In the 1860s, when the gold rush was in full swing, many Indians were violently displaced because of mining operations there. They were torn away from their sacred lands, which was catastrophic to their cultures. T-Way stressed that historically, Americans have not understood the significance of land and names to Native Americans, and this is critical to understanding the supernatural presence on the mountain. The major world religions like Christianity and Hinduism and Islam are universal. They can be practiced anywhere. You can pick up your whole life and move to Kentucky or Scotland or Istanbul, and you'll still be whatever religion you are. Your God still hears your prayers. He still intervenes in your life. But Native Americans practice land-based religions. The land they inhabit is a part of their creation stories. It's not that the land belongs to them, it's that they belong to the land, and both are in a symbiotic relationship with one another. History is embedded in the landscape. A person is reminded of specific lessons and wisdom when they see a part of the land. The mouth of this river has a story attached to it. That fallen tree has a story attached to it. A battle was won here. A chief died there. Peace was made between tribes with a feast here. When a native group is forced out of its homeland, the people lose their history. What's worse, they leave behind the places where their dead are buried. Since the dead are bound to that place, the Indians who left no longer have spiritual connections to their ancestors, and thus to their gods. Their medicines and magic no longer work. They forget the names of sacred places. As the names and history and wisdom are forgotten, the tribe's spiritual power evaporates. Tiwe said that when Pikes Peak was taken, a group of disgruntled Utes descended on the miners and slaughtered a bunch of them. Because a complex network of alliances and peace treaties, these Utes were punished by another tribe. They dug holes in the ground and slit the Utes' throats. Then they buried them upside down in the holes with their legs sticking out of the ground so that wolves would feast on their calves. That was supposed to be the end of it, but then something else happened. The legend says that these dead Utes arose from the tainted ground one night. Because their flesh had been flayed from the hips down, they looked like walking skeletons. They hobbled into the Arapaho camps and took women and children back up the mountain. They forced them deep into one of the mines, never to leave again. The howls of women and children have been reported on the mountain for over 100 years now. The Utes and Arapaho engaged in blood feuds, sometimes called morning wars, for years over this. They exchanged curses, executed and skinned and tortured each other. They stained the once sacred earth on Pikes Peak with rivers of blood. I was pretty mortified by this story. I just kind of sat there with the ranger while Tiwe and Nathan blessed the cabin. They burned sage and tobacco inside and outside, and used crushed herb dust to cover their hands. They made a handprint on every window and drew small symbols in ash at the top of the front door, inside and outside. They gave me bundled sage cedar hawthorn and told me to burn it if anyone tried to get inside. It drives bad spirits insane. Then they provided me with small pouches filled with herbs and blessed objects to wear around my neck and in my pockets whenever I went outside. Nathan gave me a totem that he wears around his neck and told me to give it to Faye. Then they sang a really incredible chant in their language. It lasted about 15 minutes. I was blown away. I fucking love these guys. Then we went outside. I showed them the dream catcher and they told me that they had never seen anything like it. The dream catcher is made with 3 branches woven together with hair, and it has old yarn or wool string with glass beads crisscrossing the center in a pattern. It is old and handmade. Tiwe told me not to touch it or move it. If you find an object of power and do not know who made it or what it protects, you should leave it alone. I asked him if it could be evil, and he said, maybe. I got them up to speed on everything that has happened. I said that a lot of my friends, Redditors, but I didn't explain that, suspected that the Fae at my house in California was a duplicate, and that the real Fae was somewhere in the woods. Tiwe and Nathan disagreed with each other on whether that could be, but we searched the woods looking for signs of my Fae. We found nothing. I told them about the missing ring, and they said exactly what many Redditors have said. If Fae loved the ring and it was powerfully symbolic to her, it could be used by a bad spirit to harm her. They told me to find it at all costs. They also told me that if Fae indeed were still here on the mountain, she was certainly dead. And the moment we've all been waiting for. Tiwe named the creature that was tormenting us. He said his people call it Atana-Anotokwa, the imposter. Bad spirits inhabit the land everywhere, and sometimes they get the opportunity to use a tragedy like the Pikes Peak massacres to commandeer a human figure and walk the earth partly mortal. In the case of the imposter, they collect animal and human parts piecemeal wherever they can and stitch them together. This is why they walk strangely, vocalize strangely, and why they never show their faces or come out during the day. They cannot pass for humans. I asked T-Way why I always see someone facing away from me at the edge of the forest, and he said it is because it does not want me to know its identity. But eventually the imposter would come for me, wearing Faye's skin and teeth and hair, and try to convince me that it was her. When I asked him what it wanted, he said, "Nobody knows." He also told me that there is power in names, as many Redditors have stated, and that I should not speak its name, especially not to it, because that could provoke it. Of the voices I was hearing in the forest every night, T-Way said, "They practice what they hear for decades. It makes it easier for them to hunt." The freaky shit T-Way, Nathan, and the ranger left at sunset, and I spent the rest of the evening thinking about all of this. And I think I've figured a lot of things out. Around 9 p.m. something disturbing happened. I used the satellite phone the ranger gave me to call Faye. She actually answered and was just lying in bed reading. We had a great conversation. I told her I missed her so much and that I was up here trying to solve what was happening. I told her I wanted to have a family with her. She said that she was feeling better, and had actually gone a whole night without sleepwalking or terrifying Jason and Richard, my buddies who are looking after her while I'm here in Colorado. After about 15 minutes of talking, I started hearing sounds outside. I heard footsteps crunching in the dry snow, and I heard a voice, my voice. It said things like, "Flight, insomnia, miss you, see you soon." The thing had been standing near the window, mimicking my conversation with Faye. I told Faye I'd call her back later and hung up the phone, then went silent. The thing walked around the cabin slowly, trying to figure out if I had moved, and kept mumbling and repeating a few phrases as it went. Finally, it came and knocked on the door. Its knock was gentle, just like last night. I was a little bit less scared because of all the blessings T-Way had put on the cabin, but I still held onto the gun just in case any shit went down. He spoke to me in my own voice, and the first thing he said was, "The hole will fill with snow and blood." So yeah, that amped up my fear quite a bit. Every hair on the back of my neck bristled. Do you know the feeling of being so scared that your vision turns hyper-real? Everything looks like a realistic video game, so everything looks just slightly off. Then it knocked again and said, "Hello? May I come in?" I simply said, "No. Leave." Then it knocked for another 30 seconds or so and said, "What is your name?" "Hello?" I lied and said, "My name is Daniel. Now leave. You can't come in." The thing started knocking harder, a lot harder, non-stop, and said, "What is your name? What is your name?" It was terrifying to hear my voice coming from the other side of the door and to hear rage building in that voice. I said again, "My name is Daniel," but the thing just kept yammering and asking the same question. It would occasionally say things like, "Ticket, ticket, rental car, you go up in the trees, the hole, down in the hole. What is your name? May I know your name?" Then I had an idea. I'm really good with fake accents. And when I was a child, my first language was German. Dad immigrated to Boston and met my mom. I started speaking in a thick accent, talking about my day, and then started shouting in German. I recited a poem I know by Hermann Hesse, Die Frauen von Ravenna tragen. My visitor went silent and stopped knocking. I could tell it was just listening. So then I started shouting in a British accent, reciting lines from V for Vendetta, my favorite film of all time. I shouted "thank you" in every single language I know. I once committed to learning it in 100 languages and stopped around 20. My unwanted guest just sort of stammered a little bit, trying to mimic me, but failed to do so. I was no longer speaking in any recognizable pattern or tone. Eventually, it just started growling the sounds Faye and I heard in the forest when we first stayed at the cabin. "Wachu, wachu, wole mai," and started scratching and pounding on the door. I grabbed the sage bundle and torched it with my lighter, then waved it all around the door frame. I don't know if the thing outside could smell it, but it walked off the porch all pissed off, growling, and went off into the night. This time I ran to the window and tried to get a glimpse of it, but all I could see was a very dark, amorphous form disappearing into the trees. I think I figured a lot of stuff out. I think this entity is mimicking me because it's going to try to convince Faye that it is me. It is rehearsing my voice and then whispering to Faye while she sleeps, talking to her in her dreams, trying to get her to let it inside of our house. I think it wants to convince her that I am the imposter, not it. I think I also figured out why the voices go crazy at night and why they're getting closer to my home. These fuckers aren't trying to scare me. They're trying to deprive me of sleep. If I'm psychologically and emotionally drained, I'm weaker. If I'm delirious, I'll make a mistake. Their or his attempts to get to me will be easier. I'm still trying to figure out how controlling Faye like a puppet in her sleep plays into all this. I know what I saw. There was a man standing outside our house walking the exact same creepy way Faye was sleepwalking, at the exact same time. I'm also still considering the possibility that I already made a terrible mistake, and that the imposter has already won. When I went outside on the first night at the cabin with Faye, trying to see where the voices were coming from, I left the door unlocked. Somebody said that that was the moment that Faye was replaced by something else. I just don't know what to think, but for now I'm going the fuck to sleep. The morning after I spoke with my fiancée Faye on the satellite phone, and then was visited by the thing that mimics our voices, I got a call from Richard and Jason. In case you don't remember, they are my two best friends, and they're staying at my place and taking care of Faye while I'm gone. They're the only people I trust. Richard stays up very late and sleeps in the morning, kind of like what I'm doing now. He does this for two reasons: to work on his art commissions and to make sure Faye doesn't stab everyone to death and burn the house down in her sleep. The guys report that she is behaving quite normally and feeling good, being productive during the day. But then at night she is unpredictable and weird. I feel like her soul is being cleaved in half. The two distinct sets of behavior are drifting farther from each other every day. Around 1 a.m. that night, Richard heard the voice of a young child mumbling incoherently. He is up to speed on all of the unusual experiences that have plagued my fiancée and me, so he immediately got up to investigate. He looked out the kitchen window, which faces the same part of the forest where I saw the man mimicking Faye's sleepwalking movements. Richard didn't find anything, so he walked a circle around the house and realized that the sound was coming from our bedroom window. He went inside and woke Jason up, and they stood outside the bedroom door listening. They claimed they heard the distinct sounds of a child whispering and softly singing, and I bet you can guess which song. Oh, soul me ah do. I'm a naked soul me ah do. The song Faye and I heard outside of the cabin on our second night, sung in a child's voice. Both of these dudes are super ripped climbing enthusiasts, and they said they had never been so creeped out in their entire lives. Jason knocked on the door and said, "Faye, who's in there?" And he promptly heard the child go shh and whisper something inaudible. Richard pushed the door open and said that Faye was standing in the corner of the room in the dark, facing the wall. She was standing up on her toes, dragging her hands and nails down the wall and talking to herself. With her back turned to the guys, she said, "Oh, their skin is so perfect. Which one? Put him down in the hole." Richard saw something out the window and hurried over to it. Jason stepped inside the room and reached out to put a hand on Faye's shoulder, but she whirled around quickly and covered her face with her hands. Her eyes were open, which is unusual for her when she sleepwalks. Then, and these are the exact words Jason used, she started speaking in the voice of a little kid. She made whining and crying sounds and rocked back and forth on her feet, cradling her arms as though she held a child. Then she turned around and started scratching at the wall again, still whispering in the kid's voice, saying things like, "It's Faye, I can't see you. Are you up in the trees or down in the hole?" Then she started singing again. Richard ran down the stairs and out the front door, barreling toward the tree line. From the window, he had seen a small child walking around on its tippy toes, flailing its arms up in the air. On the phone, he told me he could hear it singing while he watched it from the window. When Richard got about 20 yards away from the kid, it took off running on the balls of its feet, heading straight into the trees. Richard stayed in pursuit and went in after it. It was too dark for him to follow, and he lost the kid after a few moments. He wandered around for a few minutes, searching the area, and eventually heard the voice of an adult male. Rich says he walked a few steps deeper into the grove and saw a huge man standing about 30 feet away, completely naked, looking up into the trees. There were lacerations or dark pockmarks of some sort all over his body. Now Richard is about 6 feet 1 inch, 210 pounds, and bulky muscular, and he said this dude was way bigger than him. He said the man was perfectly still for several seconds, but then started rolling his head around, cracking his neck loudly, and started making gurgling and mumbling sounds. I guess Rich was paralyzed with fear, because he claims he stood there for an entire minute or more before running like hell back to the house. As he turned to get out of there, the man let out a long hello. And as he did, his voice transformed. It became my voice. Richard said that the thing in the woods called out with my voice several times as he fled, wailing, "Please help me, and they're gonna kill me tonight." Jason says that he did not hear or see anything out the window, only Richard running back inside, ghost white with terror. He said Richard actually cried. While they talked in the living room, Faye sat at the top of the stairs, just watching, wide awake, with a little smile on her face. The next morning, they took her to her psychiatric appointment, the first she's ever had, and I will hopefully hear back on that soon. It kills me that I'm not there with her now. I'm still stuck at Pikes Peak. It's like this place doesn't want me to leave. The ranger station shut down the entire road network on the mountain because of the huge blizzard that rolled in, and there are avalanche warnings. My road out of here is completely iced over, and one part of it has a snow collapse mini avalanche. Shut up, I'm from California, where God pays attention. I'm in contact with the ranger. His name is Greg, just like Faye's dad, so that's why I avoid referring him by name. And he assures me they're working on getting the roads cleared every time it stops snowing. I missed my flight, but thankfully they gave me a voucher, so now I can just roll into the airport whenever I can. I have enough food to feed an army, and the electricity here is surprisingly reliable, so I'm warm. The Wi-Fi dips out for 5 to 10 hours at a time, though. I'm working on Donkey Kong Country 2 and Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and writing about my experiences here in my spare time. I also slipped on the icy porch steps and fell on my side, so I've got an enormous bruise and it hurts like a bitch, but only when I breathe, so I got that going for me. Somebody asked me if the cabin had a basement, and I had never thought to check. Outside, under the snowpack and halfway covered with old chopped wood, I found a little locked door. The key was in the kitchen cupboard, and it turns out there's a decent-sized cellar under the house. Down inside, I found a ton of creepy shit. There is a bundle of long black hair, several dozen jars of some rotten mutant-looking shit, and tons of old books from the 60s and 70s, and lots of porno magazines. There are also lots of sticks and yarn. All of the material necessary to make a dream catcher like the one hanging at the tree line behind the cabin. I didn't touch anything. I just noped straight out of there. I've been thinking about something that somebody said to me the other day, which was, "Have you considered that it is not a dream catcher at all?" And he's right. I'm not an expert on Native American symbology or artifacts. It just looks kind of like a dream catcher to me, so I've been calling it one all this time. T-Way, the Pueblo friend of the ranger, didn't call it that. He just said to leave it alone. I'm wondering if that thing attracts the imposter instead of keeping it away. It could mark the house. I kind of want to move it for one night to see what happens. After all, T-Way blessed the entire cabin, so I feel quite safe. And I have a .357 Magnum in case leaves don't protect me. At about 9:30 a.m. there was a knock on the door. I grabbed the gun, suspecting another encounter with the imposter. It was lightly snowing and gloomy, so I figured the sun was blocked enough that the creature would be willing to come out of the woods. But then I heard familiar voices talking cheerfully. I looked out the window, and to my total surprise, it was T-Way and his son Nathan. These badass motherfuckers had hiked up from the ranger station in the snow to check on me. I let them in and they made me tea. I cannot tell you how happy I was to see them. T-Way brought me his own dream catcher. It was one he made specifically for me, and he told me I should hang it beside the creepy one. It's very colorful and ornate. I could tell he spent a lot of time on it. It's even got 2 beautiful hawk feathers dangling off it, which Nathan says represent freedom and unboundedness. He reiterated the importance of finding the engagement ring Faye had lost and blessed the house again. I tried to get them to stay longer, but they had to get back down the mountain before the storm picked up, and told me I should come with them. We all knew I wouldn't. If I left with them, I'd be leaving Greg's truck, and I'd never have found what I came back for. I said goodbye, and T-Way hugged me. I wish that guy was my grandpa. I took a nap after they left. I figured out how to sleep without being interrupted by the goddamn voices in the forest. From 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., it's pretty quiet outside, so I nap on and off. But something really bad happened this time. I woke up opening the bathroom window. I've never sleepwalked before in my entire life. Faye's been sleeping next to me for 5 years, and she says I don't move, I don't speak, I don't snore, I don't steal sheets. I'm the most polite bed buddy on earth. But when I came to, I was standing next to the toilet, both hands prying the frozen window open. It was about 2 inches up, and the freezing cold wind on my fingers is what woke me up. I slammed it shut and checked all the windows, ensuring that they were locked and sealed tight, then went back to bed. I dragged one of the living room chairs into the bedroom with me, and propped it against the door, so that I'd knock it over if I got up again. This did not work. At around 1 p.m., I woke up standing at the front door and found myself pulling it open. The loud groans it issued were what snapped me out of my stupor. I slammed the door shut and looked out the window next to it, praying nothing was out there waiting for me at the tree line. I saw nothing. Then I remembered that I'd had a dream. Images of a huge hole carved into mountains surfaced in my mind. Snow and branches were caked all around the mouth of the entrance, and an impossible, yawning blackness emanated from within. In the dream, I just kind of stood there, gazing into the vacant face of the deep, listening to Faye's weakened cries. I sat down on the couch and just sort of cried for about a half hour. I thought about what our lives had become and how bad I missed her. I thought about all of the dreams we have of our future, the things that can never be if I don't figure out how to save her. I thought about all the promises I'll never keep if I die up here. I decided that it would be best to hang the dream catcher sooner rather than later, because the clouds broke for a while and it was fantastically bright out. I got geared up and trudged across the snow with Tiwa's gift, and hung it on a branch about 3 feet away from the evil-looking one. And that's when I saw it. Faye's engagement ring. It was dangling there right in front of me as if to tease me. Someone had woven it into the strings of the dream catcher. I stood there for a long time, right between the two objects. I couldn't figure out if some benevolent force was giving me a break, or if I was being taunted by whatever beings have haunted my footsteps ever since I arrived on the mountain. Retrieving the ring would require me to not only touch, but destroy the creepy dream catcher. I had the thought to go ask on internet what I should do, but I feared that if I left even for 1 second, the ring would be gone when I got back. So I just tried to solve the riddle by myself. How I wish I'd brought the satellite phone out there with me. After a few minutes of standing there, I reasoned that T-Way's dream catcher would probably do just as well in protecting me, if in fact that was the function of the original one. I also figured that if it were cursed or something, touching it couldn't actually be worse than leaving the ring there and allowing Faye to be completely consumed by her madness. If the ring has anything to do with the creatures who are controlling Faye and me while we sleep, then getting it back is a priority over not touching weird stuff in the woods. So that's what I did. I broke the brittle thing apart and took my goddamn ring back. What else could I have done? And as if on cue, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was a person standing in the snow beside a tree about 20 feet from my left side. I was so scared I didn't look directly at him. I just watched him in my periphery and prayed he hadn't noticed me. It was a man with black and gray hair and dark clothes facing away from me. His head was tilted all the way back and he was looking way up at the tops of the trees. His limbs looked mangled and bent and elongated, even without looking right at him. I slid the ring into my pocket as slowly as I could, trying not to make a sound, and as I did, the man hobbled around and faced me. I really didn't want to look now. I just slammed my eyes shut. I knew he was looking at me. I could feel his gaze on me. He started gurgling and making throaty noises, then said in a voice so threatening I can't even begin to describe, "Felix, I know you. Felix, I know you. Felix, I know you." Over and over. I took off running and screaming like a bat out of hell. I screamed all the way back to the fucking cabin. I barricaded the front door with the couch and burned up half the sage I had left. I even prayed, like an actual prayer. I haven't done that since I was 15 years old. I'm really struggling to write this last part. It's taken me hours to finish this entry because I keep getting up to distract myself. The ranger isn't answering his phone and nobody's at the station. Maybe the power is out. I don't know what I did by breaking that dream catcher, and I don't know what tonight is going to be like. But Faye, if you ever read this and if something happens to me, don't forget. Your tenderness, your softened skin, all I needed. Your love is my tourniquet. I have to say this even though I desperately want it not to be true. The man I just saw was T-Way. Things have spiraled out of control up here on the mountain. I made a decision that changed everything, and it almost killed me. Only time will tell if it was the right choice to make. But for now, I'm just piecing everything together in my mind, and trying to convince myself that I'm one step closer to solving all of this. I destroyed the strange dream catcher that has been dangling on a tree branch behind the cabin since Faye and I first came to this place. Nobody knows who made it, what its purpose is, or why it's on the side of the tree facing into the woods, rather than the side facing the house. I found all of the supplies to make another one just like it, locked behind a cellar door that someone tried to hide years ago. But when I broke the dream catcher, I learned everything I needed to know. T-Way is dead. A lot of people have said otherwise, but I am certain of this. I saw his likeness, stretched over the gruesome form of the thing that stalks these woods. It was broad daylight, and the look on that its mangled face told me exactly what I didn't want to accept. I really am all alone. Several Redditors have speculated that this thing only shows itself at night, and always faces away from me, because it cannot convincingly appear human, not without the help of the recently dead. Tyway confirmed this during his first visit to the cabin, but when I destroyed that dream catcher, there it was, proudly masquerading in the skin and hair of my best friend on this mountain, in the sunlight no less. I cannot even imagine how his son Nathan must feel if he's even alive. The two hiked back to the ranger's station from the cabin, knowing a blizzard was coming. I'm sure that's when Tyway died. When I got back inside the cabin, I completely lost it. I barricaded the door and windows with every piece of furniture I could, but there just isn't enough stuff inside this little cabin to protect me. So I sat there on the floor against the bed, clutching the gun, sort of wishing my dark visitor would come and kill me already. But of course, this is Pikes Peak. Death is not the worst thing that can happen to you here. So the mountain kept fucking with me. It was getting dark and I was on the verge of a total psychological break. I've been running on 4 hours of sleep per night and a few naps for the past 2 weeks. My only hope for redemption just got turned into a puppet, and I was about to find out what happens come nightfall when the dream catcher no longer functions. So what did my brain decide was the best course of action at this point? To fall asleep. Somehow I nodded off. In fact, I think my brain just did a hard reset because nothing about that sleep was restful. I just went into a fear coma the minute the sun dipped behind the mountain. And then I woke up. I was in bed with the sheets pulled up over me. The lights were off, all of them, and my hands were empty when before they held Greg's .357 Magnum. When I opened my eyes, I supposed it was possible that I'd climbed into bed myself. After all, I'd caught myself sleepwalking twice the day before, but it took me a solid minute before I realized there was a fucking arm wrapped around my chest. I did not have the reaction you'd expect. Most people would fly out of the bed screaming bloody murder, but the first thought I had was, where am I? My parents divorced when I was 3, so as a kid I'd spend a few nights a week at my dad's house and a few nights at my mom's. Sometimes I'd wake up in the dark and not be sure which bedroom I was in. It always took me a second to remember where I was. This is the thought that crossed my delirious mind. Maybe I was back at home in California. Maybe I was at Faye's parents' house in Arvada. I sort of rolled out from under the arm and tried to figure out who the hell was lying in bed with me. I'd been sleeping with the lights on for the past few nights, and I'd never in my right mind have turned them off after seeing the creature so close to me a few hours ago. The body in bed beside me felt familiar, its warmth, its texture. I was pretty sure it was Faye, but I still couldn't remember if she was really with me up here. Then she spoke. She reached through the dark and touched my face and said, "What's wrong, Pop-Tart?" Yes, that's actually the nickname she gave me. Love me some s'mores Pop-Tarts. I wasn't really afraid, just overwhelmed with confusion. I asked her where we were and why the lights were off. She just squeezed my shoulder and said, "Honey, we're in Pikes Peak. There's a storm, the power's out. It's done this before. What's wrong with you?" I got up out of bed. A feeling of dread was falling over me, heavier and heavier, the more awake I became. As soon as the sheets were off of me, I felt a blistering cold, colder than it's ever been in the cabin. The heat must have been off for hours. Only a bit of pale moonlight filtered in through the windows, and it was barely enough to outline the objects in the room. I stumbled around looking for the flashlight, totally unable to remember where it was, and said, "Why the fuck is it so cold? Did you screw with the heat?" Faye tried to get me to come back to bed. She told me it went off and came back on earlier, and that it would probably be back on soon. Everything about her felt wrong, but her voice was perfectly clear. Her skin felt totally recognizable. I couldn't shake the strange feeling I had. I left the bedroom and walked out into the living room. It was even colder out there. I felt my way around with my hands and noticed a strong, icy draft coming from down the hall. It's a straight shot from the living room to the bathroom at the other end of the hall, and from where I stood I could see the bathroom window. It was wide open. A big 2-by-2-foot gap leading out to the snow. I went to shout, "What the fuck did you—" But Faye stepped out of the bedroom and stood in the hallway between me and the bathroom. She said something like, "Felix, you aren't feeling well. Do you not remember what's going on? You're sick." I almost believed her because I definitely felt dizzy and feverish, but it could also have been the mixture of disturbed confusion and freezing cold. The thought that this was not really Faye invaded my mind. and I immediately regretted not knowing where the gun was. The only words I could find were, "Who are you, and why are you here?" Faye just stood there in the darkness of the hallway. The only thing I could see was a little silver outline of her figure. Her face was entirely black, but even though her eyes were hidden, I could feel them burning into me, just as T-Wiz had when I found the ring. It felt like we stood in the eye of a hurricane. Everything was totally calm, but I knew hell was about to break loose. There wasn't a single sound outside. No branches snapped, no snow crunched, no voices moaned. It was as if time had stopped completely. Faye didn't move. Even as she spoke, she held herself with the stillness of death. She said, "Felix." It wasn't to get my attention. It wasn't to convince me she was really my fiancé. It was a threat. She was reminding me that she knew my name. I still don't fully understand what the power is in names, but T-Way and Nathan believed it, and many Redditors warned me about it. When she said my name, I felt smaller than her, even though I stand almost a foot over her head. "Do you remember the 5? She asked. She still didn't move an inch. Not even her hair kicked up in the drafts that blew in from behind her. "I can't remember, not in this place." I didn't know how to respond to this. I didn't know what she was talking about. All I could say was, "Get out, you're not welcome here." Again, Faye didn't move, but she did clear her throat, and the sound she made was about 2 octaves deeper than the real Faye's voice. She inhaled sharply and said, "Tell me." "About the number 5. And that's when I knew. I remembered where I was, what day it was, and exactly what had happened up until this point. My visitor had finally come to call, and it no longer needed to be invited. I deeply regretted breaking that dream catcher. My hand instinctively slid over my pocket, and to my relief, the little shape of Faye's engagement ring pushed back against my fingers. There was nothing else to do. I decided to throw down the gauntlet. I figured it was probably time to die anyway, so I might as well go out bravely. I just said, "I know who you are, and you will never be Faye." She took a menacing step toward me. A gurgle seeped out of her throat. She inhaled again, more slowly this time, and demanded, "I want to know about the number 5. Tell me, Felix." I looked all around me on the counters for a weapon, but found nothing. The knife block was on the other side of the short wall that divided the living room from the kitchen. There was only a roll of paper towels within reach, but in retrospect, I was so amped with terror that I probably could have beaten her ass to death with it. "I don't have a clue what that number means," I said. "In fact, about 5,000 people online don't either. Nobody knows. Only Faye knows." My visitor started shaking with rage. Her face was wreathed with impossible black. There was an endless abyss in it that stung my eyes. But then I realized something. This creature, whatever it is, has had access to Faye's mind for several hours every night. Maybe for many years. Maybe even since she first visited the cabin, when she was 5 years old. And in all that time, it still hadn't learned everything about her. It could never perfectly imitate her because she kept some things buried so deep in her subconscious that not even this thing could find them. Whatever the number 5 meant to Faye, that deep place is where she kept the secret. She didn't even go there in her dreams. The next part was all a blur. I said something like, "You are the one who speaks to her in her sleep." The visitor kind of nodded. I said, "You ask her things. She answers you. I hear everything she says." The visitor didn't react. Then I said, "You've asked her this question, just like you're asking me now. And she always says, 'No, I can't tell you.'" My visitor took another step forward, dragging a hand along the wall, as Faye had so many times in her sleepwalking fits. It raised up on the balls of its feet and twitched violently. It said to me, "I will make you tell me." It didn't try to mimic my fiancé's voice anymore. It sucked in huge breaths, trying to control its rage. There's a certain feeling you get when you're about to die. When you're in danger, and you might die, fear completely overwhelms your senses and compels you to flee, to fight, to save yourself somehow. But past that point, when you know you are going to die, that fear becomes useless and disappears. This has happened to me only once before, when I was sucked into a riptide at the beach during an El Niño winter as a teenager. In that moment, I just wondered, will my body ever come back to shore? Will they ever know what happened to me? In this moment, my heart slowed down, and I didn't feel cold anymore. I just stood there, ready to be mauled to death. I was satisfied in the knowledge that I had not given this creature what it wanted. and therefore blocked it from using that knowledge as a weapon against Faye. Whatever 5 meant, this thing needed it to take full possession of my fiancée. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I laughed. I actually laughed and said, "Well, you're shit out of luck, buddy, because I don't know what the hell it means. Maybe you can tell me when you figure it out." The imposter laughed right back, in my voice, a perfect mimicry. Then it said, "Well, then we don't need you anymore." It lunged at me. I have dodged a rabid German shepherd like I was a ninja. But this thing was so fast and so strong it knocked the wind clean out of me. I toppled backward and crash-landed on my shoulders on the tiles near the front door. It unleashed a barrage of blows on my face and neck. It raked my sweatshirt with razor-like claws. I tried my best to defend myself, but it was so dark in the house I couldn't see almost anything. I managed to flail my way free of its grasp for just a second. I pulled myself up to my feet by grabbing the counter, and in doing so, my hand brushed against the little bundle of sage I'd been burning. The imposter was on me like lightning, grabbing me by the back of the neck and pulling me with the strength of a 250-pound man. I very ingloriously whirled around and smashed the sage bundle into the creature's face, burnt end first, and wrapped my other arm round its head. Faye's familiar locks tangled in my fingers. I pulled its head forward and jammed the brittle sage into its eyes as hard as I could, screaming like a banshee. It shrieked and growled in some inhuman language and tried to push me away, but I held on as hard as I could and kept driving my fingers into its eyes, crushing the twigs in them. A memory of Nathan and Tiway's chant surfaced in my mind, and I shouted the only part of it I could pronounce. Tinikeadan, Tinikeadan, Tinikeadan. Who knows if I'm even remotely close to the correct spelling. My hand slid over its face and the mockery of Faye's appearance fell away. I couldn't see in the dark, but the face no longer resembled my fiancée's. The mouth was much too big for a human's, and the wet lips draped across the maw of 100 fangs. And that was it. The bastard had had enough. It screamed and growled and took off on all fours. Its limbs elongated as it moved farther from me. Its shape became recognizably inhuman even in the pale light. It barreled up the bathroom wall and out the window, and in moments it was completely gone. I definitely am not afraid to cry. I do it at funerals, at weddings, during the Hunchback of Notre Dame, etc. But I'm a little embarrassed to admit how long and hard I cried after that creature left the cabin. I had never felt so utterly, miserably alone in my entire life. I only stopped when the power came back on, probably 20 minutes later. The heater kicked on instantly, and I ran over to shut and lock the bathroom window. My satellite phone was gone. The gun was gone. Probably outside in the snow or up in a tree, or down in the hole. I peeked out the kitchen window and saw something lying on the porch right near the front door. When I cracked the door open just for a second, I saw that it was Tiway's dream catcher. It had been destroyed and placed in front of the cabin, mocking me, or reminding me that I was unprotected. I checked the timer on the little battery clock in the kitchen, and it read 12:15 a.m. I was going to have to spend another night in this god-forsaken cabin, but I vowed to myself that at daybreak, no matter the conditions, I would take Greg's truck and get down the mountain, or die trying. I didn't care if I slid off the cliff face. I'd never watch the sun go down in Colorado ever again. For a while, I actually considered leaving right then, in the middle of the night. Many Redditors have reprimanded me for not doing this before, but I assure you, even in this situation, driving in the dark on that icy little road next to the 400-foot cliff is a complete nope situation. But the mountain had other plans for me. At one point, I risked sneaking outside to determine how deep the truck was buried. But as I approached, I saw that the snow had been dug out around the 2 front tires, and they'd been slashed to ribbons. All I could do was let out a grim laugh and trudge back inside. At least it was warm in there now. At around 1 a.m., the voices started up. They arose from far off in the woods, several of them at once, groaning and screaming dark elegies to the night. It was all the same evil gibberish I'd heard 1,000 times before, but they slowly made their way into the open field and eventually to just outside the cabin. I lit the remaining pieces of sage and did a once-over on all the windows that weren't barricaded with furniture. I also donned the medicine pouches and amulet that Tiway and Nathan had given to me, hoping they'd be similarly effective in protecting me. Then I remembered Tiway's useless dream catcher and imagined my crumpled corpse lying in the snow beside it. Outside the front door, I distinctly heard my own voice calling, "Faye, it's me, Felix, let me in, let me in." and from near the bathroom window my voice again saying, "Hi, sweetie, I miss you so much." It repeated a few other things I've said on the phone in conversations with her, and even a few things I said to her while she was sleepwalking back at our home in California. There were footsteps on the roof, 2, maybe 3 pairs of little feet stomping all over the ceiling, voices of crying children paired with them. I stood there in the kitchen, clutching a knife and the herbs, waiting for the end. The voices circled the cabin as though a handful of deranged lunatics were slowly marching around the perimeter, singing the songs of hell as they went. They begged for help, they laughed maniacally, they whispered and screamed and talked entirely to themselves all at once. Their dim shadows passed the window curtains over and over. I heard glass breaking in the bedroom, and then in the bathroom. The stomping on the roof grew louder, and the voice at the front door grew more urgent. Someone began knocking on the door, and the others tapped on the living room windows. They all started screaming, "Faye! Faye! Let us in!" And "Felix? Are you there?" And then, as if heaven sent, a blinding white light illuminated the entire cabin from outside. All of the window curtains at the front of the house lit up, and the sound of motors drowned out the hellish cries. Someone had driven up to the cabin. I heard doors opening and men calling out, coherently. The footsteps on the roof thundered overhead to the back of the cabin, and then the screams of children drifted off into the woods out back, echoing as they withdrew. The ranger bashed on the front door, calling out my full name, instructing me to come outside. I looked out the window and saw 5 men, some in uniforms, and the ranger. There was a humongous off-road snowplow, 2 snowmobiles, and a big truck. They'd come to save my life. When I went outside, I just walked up and hugged the ranger. I didn't even grab my winter jacket. He informed me that they were getting everyone off the mountain because of a problem with the power grid. He said he feared I'd freeze to death. The ride down the mountain would have been the happiest ride of my life, except for the view. We snaked across slippery white roads, and even with the truck's high beams on, I could see the brightest stars I've ever witnessed. But beneath them, dangling in the trees, were dozens and dozens of human bodies. They swung by rope from their feet or necks. Some of them were flayed or missing parts. The ranger did not appear to notice, and I kept my mouth shut. As they passed overhead on our downward crawl, I could almost make out their frozen faces, lifeless for years, maybe decades. Their black blood stained the trunks of the trees. I'm not sure if these were the spirits T-Way talked about, or if I had simply been experiencing temporary insanity. I'm not sure I'll ever know who they were, but I'm guessing that if the ranger showed up any later, I would have become one of them. I will never forget the haunting image of passing underneath them. We arrived at the ranger station and remained there overnight. I slept on a cot in a room of about 15 people, all locals from different places on the mountain. I asked the ranger if he'd heard from T-Way or Nathan, but he said he had not. The next morning, one of his men drove me straight to Denver International Airport, and I boarded a plane without any luggage whatsoever. It didn't matter. I had the ring in my pocket, and I'll never need another jacket again, as long as I live. When I finally got home, Faye let me have it. She kept kissing me and yelling at me. I understood. She was angry that I'd spent so much time trying to take control of this situation, treating her like a child, and disregarding her feelings in my crusade to rescue her. She was upset that I consigned her to the care of my best friends without asking, but seemed to appreciate their help. Richard and Jason were very happy to leave my house and never look Faye in the eye again, although they did have some good news for me. Faye had not sleepwalked or sleep-talked or done anything out of the ordinary in over 24 hours. This corresponds almost exactly with when I retrieved the ring from the dreamcatcher. After an hour or so of reprimanding me for being a thick-headed idiot, Faye forgave me, and we laid in bed together and talked about everything. I apologized to her for the way I had treated her, and put the ring on her finger. She looked relieved to have it back on. I swore I'd never screw up like that again. We both slept a full night. No strange night terrors or bad dreams or sleep disturbances of any kind. And in the morning, yesterday morning, we had Faye's favorite, waffles. At about 11 a.m., I received a call. To my great relief, it was Nathan. I immediately pressed him for information about T-Way and what exactly had happened after they left the cabin that day. He ignored my questions and said very ominously, "Please let me speak to the one who followed you home." I said something like, what? To which he replied, "The one that calls itself Faye." My fiancé and I had been sitting on the couch watching the most recent Game of Thrones, so I just sort of handed the phone to her and said, "It's for you." She put it to her ear and said, "Hello?" and then listened for about a minute. I could hear Nathan speaking, but I could not make out what he was saying. Suddenly, a volcano of black puke exploded from Faye's mouth. It absolutely covered the couch and carpet and sent me nearly jumping out of my skin in the process. Faye doubled over onto the floor like a rag doll, coughing and sputtering. I fell to my knees beside her, panicked, asking if she was all right. I picked up the phone and screamed at Nathan, demanding to know what he had said to her. Nathan just said, "Please, Felix, please listen," and then proceeded to recite some sort of chant or incantation. A wave of syrupy vomit rushed up my throat and out of my mouth, and as with Faye, it was oily black. I am actually an emetophobe, so vomiting sends me into a state of near catatonia. But Faye had made a quick recovery and was right there to nurse me back to my senses. Nathan spoke to me a bit more and explained what he had done. I'll get to that in a bit. Faye and I spent the rest of the day feeling queasy, and eventually went to urgent care across the road to get checked out. They gave us blood tests and checked our vitals and sent us home, telling us that we'd suffered minor food poisoning. But I know deep down it wasn't the damn waffles. Thankfully, for the past several hours, we've been feeling much better. I mentioned a while back that T-Way and Nathan had a disagreement over who the real Faye was, and whether it was even possible for a duplicate of my fiancée to exist. When they hiked back down the mountain from the cabin a few days ago, they had to go up into the forest to avoid the snow collapses all over the road. Out there in the woods, they heard the crying of a woman and followed it to an abandoned mine. Both of them knew that it was very likely a trick, but Tyway said that it was their duty to explore the possibility that Faye was alive somewhere on the mountain. The blizzard came on earlier than expected. They stood at the mouth of the mine, listening to the begging of a young woman somewhere off in the dark, but concluded that its voice was too unusual to be a human's. T-Way and Nathan decided to bless entrance of the mine, which could ward off its dark inhabitants, but their chanting enraged whatever lived in it. It came out of the tunnels and snatched T-Way. He screamed all the way down into the dark, and Nathan could not follow. He ran away, terrified, but got lost in the blizzard. He wandered for an hour, fearing death, and eventually came upon a skinned body swinging from a low tree branch. It was so fresh the blood hadn't yet fully frozen. Nathan knew it was his father's corpse. Eventually, he found his way back home. He said his father's voice guided him out of the squall. Nathan explained to me that the imposter's goal of taking over someone's mind was different from its penchant for killing people. These creatures hunt and kill at random, salvaging the human parts they need to walk the earth as mortals for a short time, but their real pleasure derives from conquering a person from within. Faye was one of the unlucky few that are chosen in this way, and the imposter's fixation on her had lasted for decades. After long enough, their continued presence in the body and mind of a victim leaves a stain on the soul. This corruption necessitates a purge, hence the barf party we held in the living room, whose stains, by the way, I have thus failed to banish. Nathan invited me to the funeral ceremony for Tyway. I sadly declined, as I am already on the verge of losing my job and flat broke from this experience, but I promised that I'd honor his memory in my own way. I can't go back to that place. Fortunately, Nathan was more than understanding and promised we'd meet again soon. I'm still thinking about all of this. I do not yet have all the pieces of the puzzle. If you're looking for all the answers, you're going to have to help me find them. But I think I have part of this figured out. The imposter gave Faye's ring back to me. They wanted me to destroy the Dreamcatcher. The ring was an object of great sentimental value both to Faye and to our relationship. The creature used it to invade Faye's mind and control her thoughts. Its goal was to convince her that it was me, so that she would welcome it into our house late at night. The home, Nathan said, symbolically represents the body, just as the ring represents our union. To be welcomed into the home is to be granted accesses to Faye, but because the imposter could never learn everything it needed from Faye to mimic me, it gave up on that project and instead came after me. It returned the ring to me, thus giving up its power over Faye, but I broke the Dreamcatcher to retrieve it. As it turns out, that creepy, mysterious Dreamcatcher was in fact protecting the cabin and everyone inside it, which is why the imposter needed to be invited in. When I broke it, the creature could have easily come in and killed me, but it needed information from me before it did. It needed to know one of Faye's darkest secrets to rule her. I'm not sure I'll ever unravel the mystery of the number 5, but I do know one thing. Not knowing what it means actually saved Faye's life. I'm not sure I ever want to know. As for Faye, she's back to normal and in perfect health. She sleeps soundly and only mumbles a bit, which is pretty normal for her. Her sick sense of humor has returned as well. Last night as we went to sleep, she turned out the light and said to me, "Thank you for trying so hard." Then she leaned over and licked my face. I've been a national park ranger for close to 2 decades. Protocols have changed a lot in that time. I write this just to try to keep people safe for the next time you venture to the big outdoors. Let me tell you about the last park I worked. I can't be too specific about the location for my job's sake. Anyway, we had clusters of campsites that we rotated annually. The idea was to prevent one group from getting overused and worn down, let nature regrow a little bit. The winter had just passed, and our big summer season was a few months away. I'm sent out to check the suitability of the campsites to decide which ones need time to recover and which ones we can open up. Winters here are cold. Not too many people camp during the winter aside from rugged masochists and Boy Scout troops led by people who believe they are rugged masochists. I didn't expect to find much out of the ordinary. The first site was clear and ready to go. As I'm trekking to the next site, I see what looks like some debris and junk down a ways in a river valley. Looks like some jackasses set up an unauthorized camp down there. Usually when that happens, they leave garbage and smoldering fires. This is going to be a pain to clear up. I approach, seeing the telltale wreckage of what must have been one hell of a party. Shit scattered everywhere, the skeletons of tents still raised up. And blood. I stop, and time stops with me. Pools of blood are spread out along the ground, next to signs of something heavy being dragged into the brush. I pull my radio off my belt and pause. I then pull my Glock 22 out of my holster and rack one round. I'm a certified law enforcement officer, but I haven't had to use my gun in a long time. I quickly look around for any movement, then get on my radio and call in for backup. While I wait, I listen. Silence. Silence in nature isn't good. Prey get quiet when they sense a predator. I hope all the birds are being still on my account. I edge forward slowly, looking for anyone or anything. A shredded plastic cooler. A tent that has been annihilated with more blood splashed on the walls and inside. People died here. I know it. You can't lose that much blood and just walk off. But no people. Shreds of clothes and a little viscera drawing all the goddamned flies here, but no people. I've seen bears rummage through camps and destroy anything that looked edible. There are wild hogs here that cut trails through the deep brush and are even more dangerous than the bears. But this isn't either of them. The devastation here, it's just too much. Some scourge of God came through here and just ripped everything to pieces. Finally, backup arrives, and I'm sent to report to HQ. They even brought medics out here. I don't know why, there's no one here to save. One of the new recruits vomits at the scene. I'm glad to get the hell out of here. I get back and HQ is abuzz. Only 4 people work here, but calls are ringing, printers printing, and the air feels electrified. The manager sees me and signals me to his office. He's pale, ashen-looking with bloodshot eyes. I sit down by his desk and he goes to the door and locks it. I've never seen him lock that door. He asks me what I saw. I tell him, uninterrupted. He looks even paler afterward and his hands tremble a bit. There's a very long pause and I expect more questions. He doesn't ask any. I leave, then hear the door lock behind me. After a few minutes, I hear him call someone up, and a long, low conversation ensues. I never see him again. Word comes down from on high. We're assigned a new manager, one who excels at what he calls crises. His first order of business, a controlled burn of the unauthorized camp and the sites closest to it. I'm not arguing, I watch the smoke rise in the distance and pray that's the end of it. New orders, relocate the existing campsites closer to HQ. Before we do that, we stake out a few trail cameras at the new locations just to make sure it's not in the middle of a nesting ground. We put up a few cameras pointed at the hog trails through the brush for good measure. A couple days pass and we go out to collect the footage. The new manager takes it all and starts studying it in his office. A couple hours into reviewing, he freaks out, starts screaming and yelling, gets on the phone, calling up the line, spitting more obscenities. He spends the rest of the day and that night in the office, calling up specialists and planners. Next morning, I show up for a meeting. Manager doesn't look like he slept. Massive changes afoot. He lays out our new plans, including massively bright lampposts circling the park border, as well as floodlights around the ranger station. Campsites need to be moved even closer in. Clear lines of sight from the light, if possible. I butt in, telling him that defeats the point of going camping. If you're just going on a short walk through the grass, then setting up so close you can see the parking lot. He tells me to shut up, that it's just the start. The park now closes at sundown sharp. Also, we're now required to have a long gun on our person at all times. Now it isn't uncommon for rangers to carry an AR-15 or a Remington 870 shotgun going out in the deep woods. There are wild and rabid animals out there. The real concern are massive pot growers. These aren't your chill neighbor who hides a few plants behind the tomatoes. They run the spectrum from large-scale suppliers who like their privacy and dislike law enforcement to anti-government crazies who think we have no right over them, the true patriots. Both groups have a few common points. They tend to be well-armed, they do not like lawmen, and they won't shy away from taking a pot shot at some dumb poor ranger who finds himself in their fields. Keep in mind, Elliot Ness, Mr. I fought Al Capone and one got scared off busting up Appalachian moonshiners because they constantly sniped at him in the foothills. They shoot to kill. Those are the reasons we keep the big guns around, not routine patrols. I drew the short straw and got the overnight shift. Manager tells me more changes to protocol will be listed when I return. Overnights used to be easy. Monitor the radios, bust up the parties if needed, check for poachers if they're operating nearby. Make sure the forest doesn't burn down. I clock in and per instructions, go to the gun cage. Things have changed. Our shotguns have new rifled barrels so they can handle the solid slugs we've been issued. That's the kind of firepower you want to take down a charging bear. God forbid you ever need it. The AR-15s have been stepped up too. The old 15-round magazines have been replaced by 30-round ones. Someone even snuck us in hollow point rounds. Makes no damn sense. Shooting in the woods, you need full metal jacket ammo so the rounds don't go wild when they touch a twig. Hollow points just exist to do more tissue damage. This is ridiculous. This is overkill. We're not a war zone. We don't need this firepower. Next to the radio, there are new instructions. Now we're not allowed to directly respond to emergency calls. We can reply, figure out what the issue is, then we report to a new phone number I don't recognize. Time passes slowly tonight. I'm not even allowed to leave the building until sunup. A few uneventful nights pass. The new floodlights and lampposts are frying my eyes. It's so bright out there a blind man could see. A week later, some kids roll into the lot. They grab their backpacks and start hiking up the ridge. I know what they're up to. No one has booked a campsite that night. Cheap young ones going on a camp out that will be a raging party. I wait for the sun to go down, confirming they're not out for a day hike. I call my manager to report. He instructs me to call the new number. I report up to them now. A curt voice answers the phone. He asks my park, then pauses. He asks the issue. Bunch of kids on an unauthorized site. Do I go break it up? I can see their campfire out the ridge right now. Number, do not leave the building. Do not attempt communication. That is all. Report if there are any developments. Right after daybreak, the manager rides up. It's real early. Have you seen them? Did they leave? No. The car's still there. Let them rest. They're probably all hungover. He curses nonstop. He then goes inside to make a call. I'm outside looking up the ridge when he exits the station. One AR-15 in his hand, another one strapped across his back. Glock on his hip. He marches single-mindedly toward his car. I try to ask him what in God's name he's doing, but he isn't listening or responding. He takes a jerry can of gasoline from his car and marches up the ridge. I yell after him to no reply. I consider following him, but that doesn't seem like a good idea. I go back inside and call the number. The same curt voice. The same direct questions. Yeah, the manager went up to that campsite. Armed to the teeth and carrying gasoline. What the fuck do I do? Stay there, do not interfere. Backup is inbound. Report if there are any developments. About the same time, I start to see smoke wafting off the ridge. 2 vans ride into the lot at a screaming speed. A dozen men, heavily armed and armored, exit quickly. I go out to check. Who are you guys? What's going on? The men are all lined up with that impeccable military precision. One of them, a commander I assume exists the vehicle last. He says, which direction did he go? I mean, he's up there. I point at the increasing smoke. The men fan out and start jogging up the ridge. I hear rifles cocking as they leave. I try to shout after them, but no response. I look at the vans they came in. Large, nondescript. They just say DOE response team on the side. Half an hour later, they return, dragging the manager with them. He is bound in zip ties, he screams. I did what needed to be done. Trust me, it's worse than they thought. We can't stop this. Burn it all. They throw him in the back and sedate him. The commander approaches me. My neck hairs bristle in cold fear. I need to see the office. All computers and anything with a hard drive is coming with me. He mentioned videotapes. I need those too. I unlock the doors and they ransack the place. Everything gets taken. Printed reports from the last few years disappear into those vans. The videotapes get bagged up and held by the commander himself. He studies the gun cage. Cute. You're out of your league. He scoffs. Finally, they found everything they looked for. The commander tells me, call the number. Tell them it's contained. You need a new superior. Also, don't talk about this to anyone. They leave, and just on cue, the fire brigade and a few news vans show up. The fire is contained, the news reports say. Rumors of missing campers are unsubstantiated at this time. Still, the rumors alone are enough to scare of this season's campers. The quick change-up of managers is chalked up to bureaucracy. The press dies down after a week or two. The new manager is very good at dealing with them. Thankfully, with no new campers and our now even shorter open hours, we can get more work done around here. Rebuilding the station took some time, and we just set up the new campsites. They're practically spitting distance from the station. Nothing dramatic happens for a few days. Then on a whim, the manager tells us to set up some cameras around the station and the campsites. There's usually so much human activity around here, all you see are some raccoons. Maybe the rare hungry bear, but we humor him and set them up all around. Couple of days pass, we collect the footage. I play poker with one of the rookies while the manager watches hours of footage of an empty but brilliantly illuminated parking lot. Then he gets to the footage around the station. Screams come from the office. We barge in and he's stamping on the camera hard drives, gibbering things I can't understand. Along the lines of, told me it was clean, safe. No recent activity. Bullshit here, I'm not gonna do it. He barks at us to leave. Later he makes a call. Rookie goes up to the door and listens in. Rookie comes back reporting, yeah, he's demanding a transfer. Says they lied to him. Something about they didn't do their jobs properly. He's not prepared or equipped here. Then I just heard the phone click and some sobbing. Hours later, my manager exits the office. His shoulders are slumped, defeated. We cut our hours even further, practically open on weekends only. We'll have a full staff ready those days, but a skeleton crew the rest of the time. Campers are required to check into one of the closest sites. No campsite, and they're told to leave. We are not authorized to leave the station after dark under any circumstances. In an emergency, do not call 911. Call the number and do exactly what they say. We draw straws for who gets overnight shifts. Why we need to stay overnight if we can't do anything is beyond me. I asked the manager about it, and he just said that standard protocol is to have someone on hand to report any irregularities overnight. I have to work my overnight shift. I keep my phone close, the number dialed in, ready if I need to call. It is a bad night. I just wind up pacing around with my shotgun, glancing into the bright floodlights, trying to see what's past them. I hear crickets and it relaxes me. Prey is quiet when predators are around. It is a long night. The next night, my manager draws the short straw. He seems resigned. In the end, we all have to take a turn. He brings the brightest damn tactical flashlight I've ever seen. Said he bought it just because he's afraid of the dark. He isn't really. He's afraid of the things in the dark. I get a phone call at 3 a.m. It's him. Get over here now and bring guns. What, you have a damn arsenal? Now, oh, I swear to God I fucked up. Oh man, I think they're attracted to the light. I called that number and all they said was backup would be here in the morning. Oh fuck, goddamn. I hear the piercing staccato of gunshots. A pause. More gunshots. Screaming. Scuffling. The line goes dead. I call the number. A new terse voice answers. Look, I work at that park. I just got off the phone with somebody. I just spoke with somebody. What can you report? Something bad happened. It's serious. I heard gunshots. We will have backup there as soon as possible. Did he say anything else? Yeah, he said he thought they were attracted to the light. Doesn't make sense to me. Interesting. Thank you for your report. The park is now closed. You will be reassigned. Goodbye. Click. Officially, the park was closed to be scheduled for a controlled burn. Let the old trees die and make room for new ones. There was nothing in the official report about what happened to the manager on duty. The public understanding was bureaucracies need to be shaken up on occasion. No one asked any more questions. I get transferred to a new park halfway across the country. Change of scenery and beautiful. They've got some odd rules here too. Don't go far after dark and don't carry a flashlight. I'm concerned about why. Why can't you use a flashlight at night when you need one? They won't tell me. Be safe, everyone. I quit my job as a public defender a couple of years ago because I met a client, let's call him Isaac, whose case made me question my own sanity. Now, after all this time, I need to share his story. People may be in danger, including myself. Or perhaps I'm freaking out over nothing, I hope so. When we first met, I had Isaac write down his version of events in as much detail as possible. What follows is his account. About 5 months ago, I woke up one morning with a persistent itch under my right eye. When I looked in the mirror, I found a red mark on my eyelid and thought maybe I'd scratched myself during one of my stress dreams. I didn't think much of it, but then it started to look infected. Every day for weeks I would take stock of the blemish in the mirror. Every day it would get nastier. Kept telling myself it would probably heal on its own, while it grew into a yellowish lump the size of a grape. Looked at all kinds of horrors on WebMD, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I felt it when I blinked. That's when business started to dry up. I'd been flipping cars on Craigslist with my buddy Lucas. He had the mechanical know-how and handled logistics, while I'd go out and work my charm, make deals. It's important not to look like a skis bag in that line of work, and suddenly I couldn't unload this Nissan Altima on anybody. People looked at me different, got skittish. Lucas stopped returning my texts. The gall of the man. He lived in the apartment directly below mine. I could hear his life, his shouting matches with his girlfriend Polly, his toddler Ophelia throwing fits, his Doberman barking at nothing. We would have a relationship whether he liked it or not. Even the old gray cat stopped coming around. I called him Gravy. He was a long-haired fella that would waltz into my place through the window above the fire escape. I lived on the 4th floor. I'd feed him licks of vanilla ice cream during that sweltering summer. He probably belonged to somebody. I had to wonder if he stopped returning because of my face. And yeah, I must admit I was nearly dead broke after making a few bad bets on DraftKings. Couldn't make rent or my phone bill. So that's why I never made a doctor's appointment. Knew in the back of my mind that if things got desperate, I would have to go to the pawn shop to loan my prized Rolex. Again, it was my only real asset. I slept with it on. And finally, the wasp appeared. It got stuck inside the dome of the light fixture above my bed. Didn't know that was possible. With the light on, I could see its body in silhouette, its big-ass stinger. It bounced around, tapping the glass when I tried to sleep. And that was the night I started to lose it. Like, goddamn, why me? There's always some bullshit, can't catch a goddamn break. All these little indignities had piled up, and now I had this wellspring of venom spilling out of me. Paced around cursing, checking the mirror over and over, looking at my ugly mug, rapping my knuckles on my head, turning the light on and off, watching the wasp crawl in its cage. The next morning, I went to Lucas's to confront him. The dog went nuts as soon as I knocked, and when Lucas answered with Ophelia on his hip, she started scream-crying at the sight of me. Polly dragged the dog and kid away, and I was pissed. And when I get pissed, I get to ranting, and I ranted about all this stuff. The wasp, the cat, his dog, my face, him ghosting me, DraftKings, and the whole time he couldn't look me in the eye. He constantly sniffled and rubbed his nose, this nervous tick. Made him look pathetic. I couldn't fathom how he'd get along without me. To my surprise, he cut me off and said, "Isaac, I'm not giving you money, man." And you know why. He knew I would ask. Then he looked at my blemish and his expression flickered. Seemed he was cycling through several emotions. I read them as queasiness, worry, and then contempt. He sniffed and said, "I can see you're in trouble. Go see Sylvia in 205. She'll help." No other explanation. He shut the door in my stunned face. Well, I assumed it was about my skin problem, and he just didn't want to say it. So I moseyed down to 205, knocked, and this tiny, wrinkled woman, maybe 80 years old, let me in. She was a hoarder. The place was cluttered with potted plants, newspapers, and all kinds of knickknacks and pieces of junk. I remember lamps made from blown glass, jewelry and letters strewn on the coffee table along with a fancy letter opener, a metal ring puzzle, family photos and abstract paintings covering the walls from floor to ceiling, a bowling trophy, a marble bust, fine china displayed in a cabinet, a PhD placard for folklore studies, a dog bone, a dream catcher in the window. She shuffled over and sat cross-legged on the floor. By the way she dressed, wearing this red, silky robe thing and feather earrings, she seemed a bit new agey. I figured she'd give me a salve made from tree bark or some shit. When you're in a crisis, you start to look everywhere for a solution, even towards mumbo-jumbo. But she didn't say a thing for the longest time, so I filled the dead air with my rant again. She finally said in her croaky old woman voice, "Give me the wasp." "What do you mean?" "Give me the wasp." We stared at each other for a long moment. It seemed like her eyes pointed in two different directions, just slightly. "I thought you would help with my whole facial issue," I said. "Give me the wasp." I couldn't pry anything else out of her. She just repeated it over and over, and I was fuming, like, is this a joke? Does she have dementia? Eventually, I zipped out of there, and my spite carried me back to my apartment. I unscrewed the light fixture, and after stalking it for 2 minutes, captured the wasp in a Tupperware container. Then I returned to old Sylvia. She didn't say shit as I brandished the container at her. So I opened it, let the wasp float out into her place. "There's your wasp." No reaction. She only stared at me, not so much as a shadow of an expression. I left with my fury peaking and simmering down into this cold nothing. A day later, I went out to the pawn shop to loan out my precious watch. But when I got to the parking lot, I spotted a glint on the pavement, a diamond ring. I hurried and pawned it for $800. Later, I won $1,000 on DraftKings. And over the next couple days, the gnarly spot on my face began to clear up. It receded back into a small red dot, though it still itched a bit. I paid rent and sold the Nissan. Couldn't help but connect my strange interaction with Sylvia to my turn of luck. I enjoyed a week of normalcy before the spot returned with a vengeance, but not a lump this time. It quickly spread out into a flat, yellow-brown splotch, like a bruise on an apple. One morning I poked the flesh with my pinky, and I can only describe it now as too soft. My finger left an impression that lingered like memory foam. Almost threw up right then. Decided to go to urgent care, but my keys were missing. In a nauseous panic, I tore up my whole apartment, my closet, my dresser, and the furniture. What did I find? 1. A couple of mysterious bloodstains on the carpet that I'd never noticed before, small and round. 2. Fat cockroaches in the couch cushions. And I thought of Sylvia, sitting there in the corner of my mind, expressionless. Couldn't dislodge her. I thought maybe I would apologize for the wasp, to cover my bases, realign my karma. I was a bit dizzy. I clenched my teeth and went down to apartment 205. Again, she let me in and sat on the rug. Again, I filled the silence, rambling about my problems. She said, "Bring me the cockroaches." "What's your deal?" "Bring me the cockroaches." "Are you all right?" I raised my voice at her. "Bring me the cockroaches." And on and on. What can I say? They were harder to capture than the wasp, but I corralled 2 cockroaches in the Tupperware container and returned to Sylvia. This time I knelt, sort of bowed to her, and placed the container at her feet. Thought I was making peace with her. Caught a whiff of her, earthy. She had fuzz on her upper lip, liver spots. She breathed long and deep through her nose. Had this reptilian stillness. Her eyes, just a bit bloodshot in the corners. They followed my movements, but only after a short delay. Like when I stood back up, they looked into the empty space before flicking up at me. Didn't blink. It occurred to me that she was in some kind of meditative state. I walked to the door, and when I turned to say goodbye, her mouth hung open, yellow teeth on display, a glisten on her lips, maybe saliva. At this point, this dread congealed in me. Left feeling weak, I decided to walk the 4 miles to urgent care. Clear my head and get some fresh air. By the time anybody would see me, they looked at me like I was a moron because the thing on my face had gone back to a somewhat normal color and reduced dramatically in size. Looked like a standard bruise. They told me to see a dermatologist. And over the next few weeks, I watched the blemish shrink back into a red speck. Almost didn't want it to happen because it just wasn't normal. I was stuck in this psychedelic headspace, checking the mirror every 2 minutes. After staring into the mirror for a while, my vision would go blurry and I'd think it was there again. I couldn't bottle my nerves. One evening I went over and knocked on Lucas's door, but he wouldn't answer. Started slamming on his door and yelling, "What's with Sylvia, bro? Answer me." No response, but I heard Ophelia crying, so I knew he was there. I banged on the door hard. Some weird shit's going on and I'm not having it anymore. I stood there listening for a long while. Once Ophelia stopped crying, there was silence. I won something like $4,000 on the sportsbook apps. Never found my keys. And the roach infestation was gone. The whole time, slack-jawed Sylvia was there in the back of my mind watching my life. Had an appointment with a dermatologist scheduled in a couple goddamn months. I prayed to God that this was just a weird episode, and things could go back to normal. A few days later, I woke up at 3 a.m. with my face itching. Something smelled like sweaty feet and my skin was wet. Checked the mirror and my stomach dropped. Pus leaked out this wound, a hole in my eyelid. And I thought, maybe I could see a bit of white. The white of my eyeball through the hole. I puked into the sink. Turned away spitting, couldn't look at it again. It was my face. I was losing my mind. I wanted to go back to urgent care, but I couldn't find my phone or shoes. Looked everywhere. Ran out of the apartment in a panic. Started knocking on doors. I need help. Yelling, moaning. Someone call me an ambulance. Nobody answered. Knocked on all the doors on my floor. Where the fuck is everybody? Not a peep. Went back into my apartment and slumped onto the couch. Noticed drops of dried blood scattered all over the carpet. Sat for a long time waiting for something to happen. Maybe for the police to show up. Tried to calm down. Tried to tell myself that I wasn't dying. Went to the fridge, but my damn ice cream was missing. Blood drops on the linoleum, too. Grabbed a bottle of Jameson and drank until I got really tired. This confusion hit me. Dissociative. Almost didn't know where I was. Heart went crazy. There's nothing else like it, the feeling that you're having a psychotic break. It's damnation. Sylvia was out there watching me through the cement and drywall. This rage, directed at her, started building in me. Rage was better than the confusion. I prowled around, bouncing off the walls until the inertia propelled me out the door. I took the bottle with me down to 205, banged on her door. When Sylvia opened it, I raved at her. I said that I wanted out, no more. Demanded she give my shoes back. I think I threatened to, kill her. She didn't flinch, just shuffled back to her spot on the carpet and said something I couldn't hear. So I stepped closer into the apartment. The place smelled like cooked pork chops. Give me the watch. I hesitated. Give me the watch. I realized then I was a coward. I guess I sort of always knew in the back of my head. Please, just leave me the hell alone. I flung the Rolex into her lap and left. Stumbled back to my apartment and drank until I fell asleep. Spent maybe 4 weeks, the longest period yet, watching the thing heal. The hole disappeared and the blemish shrank down into the red dot, but it still itched. I still didn't have my phone, shoes, or keys. I only left my apartment to go to the corner store to buy ice cream, Oreos, Jameson, and like 1,000 scratchers. Won nearly $10,000. Counted the days until my dermatologist appointment. Woke up one morning to the smell of rot. Gathered my courage to look in the mirror. The bottom half of my eye was exposed. Lower eyelid gone with the area around it necrotic black. My first reaction was to put my hand over it because I thought it would fall out. I felt the wetness and I fainted. When I came to, I crawled into the living room. Gravy, the cat, stood perched on the fire escape. I coaxed him into my arms with a spoonful of ice cream. He purred and I wept as I cradled him. Soft, friendly guy. Sylvia was out there in her apartment, as still as a lizard, watching me, and I knew she was saying, "Bring me the cat." I went slow, could barely walk straight. Took the stairs one at a time and thought oh God, what will happen to Gravy when I give him to Sylvia? Every step I would pause and think about turning back, but I kept going. I had no other choice. I needed to save my face. Fought to stay upright, scratching Gravy's chin, telling him I was sorry, until I reached the landing and turned the corner. I saw something and crept back. Down the hall, Lucas held little Ophelia outside apartment 205. Polly's little girl, Ophelia, 4 years old. Lucas knocked on the door and entered. I padded down the hall with Gravy still in my arms, pressed my ear to the door, a muffled voice, a long pause. I stood behind the door when it opened again. Lucas stepped out, without Ophelia, and turned to find me. We both said something like, "Oh shit." His nose was bleeding. He held his hand up to it, but couldn't stop the flow down his lips. The blood had dyed his mustache and beard completely red, like a lioness's fur after feeding. Blood dripped off his chin onto the carpet. I stared until it hit me, the blood. "Have you been in my apartment?" I asked. He doubled over in laughter. Sounded like hiccups, hic hic hic. Blood fell onto the floor in spurts. He coughed out, "Sylvia, wanted your ice cream," and laughed some more. I pivoted into the apartment. Sylvia sat on the floor with Ophelia in her lap. A string of drool dangled from her mouth onto Ophelia's hair, but Ophelia was oblivious, playing with the metal ring puzzle. Sylvia's eyes looked up to me. She placed Ophelia on the ground and stood. She took the letter opener and pulled it from its sheath, revealing a black blade. With her right hand, she held the blade aloft. With her left hand, she touched Ophelia's head. I threw Gravy at Sylvia. He landed claws first on her head. As Gravy raced down her back, his claws made this popping sound, tearing through her skin, but she barely reacted, moving her hands slowly, trying to catch him. I ran and grabbed Ophelia like a football. Sylvia tumbled over as I shoulder-checked her on my way to the window. I lunged out the window and onto the fire escape. All the way down, I begged little Ophelia to take her mom and escape. Leave Lucas, leave the apartment. "Please, do you understand?" I asked her, but she beat on me with her little hands. I guess my face looked normal by the time the cops caught up with me several hours later. And Isaac looked normal by the time I came to see him. He was charged with kidnapping. After reading his tale, my first thought was that he obviously made up the whole thing in a stupid attempt to justify his actions. Then, after he assured me he wasn't lying, I thought maybe I would plead insanity for the first time in my career. But his case never made it to trial. Strange things began to happen. The cops found out that Polly, Lucas's girlfriend, had gone missing. And before they could figure out what was going on, they found Lucas covered in blood in his bed, expired. The detective in charge mentioned other missing people. When I asked him how many, he wouldn't say. I told him to visit Sylvia in 205. He told me that they had everything handled and to keep my nose out of it. Isaac told me that he had money for a better lawyer. He just needed help getting it from the bank. Shortly thereafter, he landed in the hospital. I never heard from him again. They wouldn't divulge the cause of death. Ophelia ended up with her aunt and uncle. None of the disappearances made the news. I called the detective again at some point. He told me not to go to the press. It could ruin the investigation. I thought it was a bogus threat, but I complied anyway. I tried to forget about it and move on. Why am I sharing this now? Because I think I did something stupid, Sylvia. She got stuck in my mind, lodged in there. I've dreamt about her numerous times, even though I've never seen her. I had to know if she had anything to do with the disappearances. So, after all this time, about 2 years, I tracked down the apartment. Once I entered the lobby, I knew it was the right place because I found a bulletin board with an old missing cat poster for Gandalf, the long-haired cat. But when I saw it, I was overcome with a sense of dread. I left without visiting 205. I guess I'm a coward. The day after I visited, I got this big zit on the center of my nose. Now I keep telling myself not to worry. But I check the mirror every 2 minutes. I'd known Hugh since childhood, but by this time I hadn't seen him for several years. You know how it goes. By the time you reach the 9th grade, you promise to be best friends forever. Then you go out 3 times to the pub during high school, and that's the end of it. But Hugh probably didn't want it to end that way, and so a few months ago, a letter arrived in my mailbox. "Dear Dennis, I haven't seen you in a long time. If you ever want to come see me at the lighthouse, wait for me at Miami Harbor, dock number 608, any even Wednesday at dawn. Or you can make your way here on foot. It's about 30 miles east of South Beach, though I would strongly advise against it. Hopefully, we'll see each other soon. Hugh Collins." It struck me as strange how he assumed it was obvious that he lived in a lighthouse. One part of me thought the trip was a ridiculous waste of time, while another kept reminding me that there was nothing to do at home anyway. At that time, I was mostly living off my father's inheritance and the small jobs people occasionally offered me. After my father's death, I was, on one hand, financially secure, and on the other, bored out of my mind because although taking care of him had been a real drag, at least it kept me busy enough not to notice the emptiness of my life. In the end, I realized that I had nothing else to do, so I decided to go. That very day, I went to the Greyhound Line's office and booked a ticket for the next bus to Miami. I packed a small bag, and the next morning, I patiently waited at Port Authority bus terminal until a shabby-looking vessel, which the driver called Baby, arrived. When I was young, my parents would punish me by making me kneel on a spoon, and despite that, I can honestly say the hours spent in that bus were the longest I've ever experienced. By early Wednesday morning, I arrived in Miami and immediately hurried to the harbor. At dock number 608, a man in shorts, a sailor's shirt, and a cap was standing. He had short hair and scruffy facial hair. "Dennis, is that you?" he asked. "I'm so glad to see you, old buddy." He smiled and shook my hand warmly. It had been about 10 years since I last saw him, but he looked like he had aged about 25 years. On our way to the market to buy supplies, we chatted about life and how much everything had changed. I was really curious how someone ends up as a lighthouse keeper. It's simple, my friend. You carefully watch the classifieds in the newspapers, and when they don't have any ads, you look for articles like, "Desperate keeper committed suicide by jumping off the lighthouse." That usually means they have a job opening. This is the third lighthouse I've worked at. The previous two stopped functioning. Nowadays everything's transported by airplane and the lighthouse keepers don't have much to eat. He sighed, but then laughed again. It turned out that he hadn't really changed much since I last saw him around the end of high school. After a pleasant lunch and the obligatory visit to the liquor store on 22nd Street, we boarded a small boat and embarked on a 2-hour journey to the lighthouse. On the island, the warm wind blew and the sky was a deep azure. It kind of reminded me of the planet of the Little Prince because from one end, where the dock was, you could see all the way to the other end, where a sharp rocky outcrop stood. "Hey Hugh, what's that over there?" "That's a cave. I used to go swimming there, but a few months ago some stones fell from the ceiling, and now it's a bit dangerous because of the waves." I assumed Hugh spoke from experience because when I asked, a nervous look appeared in his eyes. It was beginning to get dark, so we started a fire and threw a few steaks on the grill. And since God doesn't look after us after dark, we had to open the bottle of wild turkey we had bought earlier. The whiskey Hugh liked. Maybe it was the fire or perhaps just the atmosphere, but that steak, straight off the grill, was the best piece of meat that had ever touched my lips. "Aren't you ever afraid to be out here? I heard there are some treacherous waves or something, that ships sink and planes crash and so on," I asked as the moon rose directly above us, and we moved inside because it was time to signal the Cuban steamer that we were where we were supposed to be. "Afraid to sail? I'd have to be a real coward to be afraid of these little waves," he replied, gesturing toward the sea, where the reflection of the moon and stars shimmered on the water. "But the night here on the island can be eerily quiet, you know, especially since I've been alone here." "Has anyone been with you? Didn't something happen? Like the thing you told me about from the newspaper?" At that moment, I regretted asking anything. I had driven my host into a very uncomfortable conversation. "I didn't mention it," he paused. "I used to have a dog named Ronnie and a wife, Isla. One day, Ronnie wandered off somewhere and Isla..." He stopped again and it seemed like he was fighting back tears. "Isla got some sort of disease here and died almost overnight. The whole family blames me. I should have taken her away from here. I basically killed her." Hugh's head dropped into his hands and I didn't know what to say. Suddenly, we were interrupted by the sound of crying. At first, I thought it was Hugh, but then he lifted his head and showed no signs of sobbing or sniffing. "What's that, Hugh?" I asked, though I briefly wondered if it was a product of my tipsy mind. "The Gray Lady. That's what the locals call her. They say she was a woman who shipwrecked here years ago and died of hunger, and she still cries to this day. The truth, and the scientists have confirmed it, is that it's some sound the waves make, shifting through the peculiar arch of that cave." That piqued my curiosity, and I really wanted to go see the cave. Hugh looked at me again with a nervous smile. "If the conditions are good tomorrow morning, I could show you." I tried to get more local ghost stories out of him in the hope that we might at least leave the dead wife subject for another night. He told me he knew none except for a tale about a pirate's ghost from Brickleberry. Bummer. "Want a drink?" I asked. He agreed and we had a drink. Then I probably fell asleep. It was already well past 2 in the morning. The sound of crying woke me up again. I chuckled under my breath at the story of the Gray Lady, and then decided I might as well take a trip to the latrine while I was awake. I opened my eyes and noticed that Hugh was sitting at the end of the bed, his head in his hands again. I was about to say something, to reassure him it wouldn't be that bad, but somehow I couldn't move. God, I was tied up. Hugh turned toward me and I noticed the knife in his left hand. He began to scream. It became clear that Hugh wasn't just a nice guy, but also possibly a cannibal. He covered my mouth. "You don't understand. She's hungry. She would take me. I can't go to hell without a fight. Not after what I did, I had to." He repeated the last sentence over and over as I felt a sharp pain and warm blood somewhere in my stomach. My eyes closed, and I knew the game was over. The last words I heard were, "It wasn't your fault, she's to blame, that monster, that monster." And at the very end, something clicked for me. I didn't resist. He was right. He had to. For as long as I can remember, I've been terrified of aliens. When you were growing up, you might have asked your parents to check under the bed for monsters, but I made my parents check for aliens. I'm not sure where my fear of extraterrestrial intelligence came from, but as I grew older, that fear turned to curiosity. I wanted to learn everything I could about the stars and other worlds. When my boyfriend and I first moved in together and I shared this interest with him, he suggested I download a star map app on my phone. Whenever you're curious about a constellation or star, the app will tell you what you're looking at, he explained. Living in a two-bedroom apartment on the third floor of our building, we didn't exactly have space for a telescope, so we figured this was a happy medium. Our bedroom window offered a stunning view of the grassy field below, and while we could never see that many stars because of light pollution from the neighboring city, the few celestial bodies we could see were enough to entertain me before falling asleep each night. "Jack," I'd say, my eyes focused on the sky outside. "Look at that light up in the sky. Is that a UFO?" When you're fascinated, scared of aliens, every foreign light in the sky is a UFO until proven otherwise. "Probably," Jack would joke. "What does your star app say?" I'd sit up to throw my legs over the side of the bed, stretching my arms towards the window, my phone pointed outside. "Oh, it's just Mars," I'd respond, somewhat relieved. Jack would smile, kiss my forehead, and settle back into his corner of the bed. This continued throughout the years, and the app really was useful every time there was a strange light in the sky. But this past month, I noticed a new light in our atmosphere. Jack always had an explanation for me. It's a planet, or it's just a star. But this didn't explain the fact that every night it was much brighter than anything else in the sky. It always changed location, too. Some nights it would be closer to the horizon, right in front of us, and other nights it would be further off into the distance, almost on the other side of the sky. My star app was never able to identify the mysterious glow. Finally, I earned Jack's interest. "Jack, look, that light in the sky, it's flashing now," I shouted to him. He sat up in bed and rubbed his eyes to look at the bright, blinking body. "You're right. What is that?" he replied, getting out of bed to get a closer look. Meekly, we both snuck over to the window, staring at the mysterious, flickering object that was now darting quickly through the darkness. Its movements were erratic, moving vertically as well as horizontally in space. But I looked at Jack, his eyes wide in alarm, and realized he had come to the same conclusion. The light in the sky looked as though it was searching for something. "Should we close the curtains?" I whispered, my eyes once again glued to the glimmer on the other side of the thin pane of glass. "Yes," Jack replied curtly as he let go of my hand to grab the drapes. That small movement was enough to gain the attention of the floating object in the sky. Its focus immediately turned to us, its blinding light shining directly into our apartment. My mouth fell open as I stared into the beam, frozen in fear. A resounding silence flooded the air as I held my breath, and I realized that the window pane, it was gone. I could feel the biting night air on my naked face. With a gust of air and in the blink of an eye, the glowing object was upon us. I screamed. My instincts kicked in and I bolted for the door, falling over my own feet on my way to the exit. "Jack!" I shrieked, tears stinging my cheeks. "Jack!" I screamed again as I spun around to find him still at the window, seemingly in a trance that nothing could break. The light flooding our room was so bright I could barely see. "Jack!" I pleaded once more. He didn't move, his body illuminated by the devastating radiance. The glow became so overwhelming that I had to close my eyes. When I finally opened them, the brilliance of the entity was replaced by the glow of the morning sun, which shone through the now intact window of our bedroom. I gasped, finding myself in our bed, shaking awake from the nightmare. I rolled over to grab Jack, only to realize that he wasn't there. Tears welled up in my eyes as I rushed to grab my phone. I had 27 missed calls from various family members. Only then did I realize that 8 days had passed since Jack and I had last retired to bed. I don't know what happened to me during those days I've lost, and I'm not sure that I want to know. What I did know was that it was pointless to look for Jack. I would never see him again, and I knew this as fact, somehow. The understanding was like an immense weight on my chest, once again making it difficult to breathe. With trembling hands, I turned my phone off and fell back asleep, not yet ready to face reality. That was 4 days ago. This morning, I turned my phone back on. Friends and family continue to call, but I don't know what I would tell them. Jack is gone, and soon I will be too. Somehow I know they'll come back for me. I can feel it in my bones, the way an old man's joints ache right before a storm. Each night I sit at the edge of my bed, waiting for the flashing light to return. I'm not afraid anymore. I know now that this is the way it was always supposed to be. One week ago, I was interviewed for a job position as a substitute teacher in Orlando. I have a PhD in humanities and social sciences. I was not satisfied with my old job, so I thought I would take a break and find a temporary job pursuing my passion for the subject and teaching it. Everything seemed fine with the interview, and due to my professional attitude, I was offered the job on the spot. My ego was inflated for a second until a second thought hit me. Why was I hired right here on the spot? There must be other candidates for this job. Thinking back on the interview, I remember them saying that this class is particularly tough, not because of the demanding material that needs to be condensed and taught, but because of the class. Now I have no idea what they meant by that, so I shrugged it off at the time and continued the interview as usual. I probably should have asked what they meant by that statement, but it's too late now. The class is already in session and I'm about to walk in. Except there is no one here. Now I'm accustomed to teenagers being late for class. Heck, even I used to be late for some classes back in my day. But there always were at least 5 people in the classroom. I walked outside to check if I was at the correct room. Social sciences and humanities. It read on the door. I walked back in and decided to wait. I am going to wait at least 10 minutes before walking out and reporting this to the headmaster. I thought to myself. Maybe 2 minutes passed until I heard a faint noise coming from the hallway. Finally, someone is going to show up, I thought nervously. A kid opened the door. The movement of the arm as it opened the door looked animated. Behind the first kid marched the other students, 20 of them to be exact. They all walked in the same straight line, their steps synchronized and their movements robotic. All of them sat on their chairs in the exact same manner, at the exact same time, opened their notebooks in synchronization, and lifted their heads at the exact same pace and started staring at me. Their eyes were wide open. None of them seemed to blink or react in any way, just staring. I needed a second to comprehend what just happened. I quickly snapped back to reality and decided to ignore their antics. They must be pulling some kind of prank on me, I thought. Standing up, I reached for the attendance sheet that was laid on the desk. The kids started writing something down in their notebooks, but I paid no attention to them. They were probably just doodling, waiting for the class to start. When I saw the attendance sheet, I was quite shocked. There were no names. Now I have no problem asking each person what their name is, but it would have been a bit of a help if the teacher before me left some kind of notes or marks. Sorry guys, give me just a moment, I said to the kids and reached for the other files on the desk. There are no names here either, no grades, nothing. At this point I felt a chill in my spine. I felt that something is wrong and I needed to get out of there. I will be back shortly, please remain seated, I said to the kids and quickly paced to the door with long steps. As my hand reached for the door handle, I saw it disappear right in front of me. I stood there in shock with my hand clutching nothing but the air. I kept my glance right in front of me. I dared not turn around. I could feel that something was watching me with intense malice, and if I turn around, it would be the death of me. A voice snapped from one of the students. Please, Mr. Morris, let's continue from where Mr. Bennett left off. The voice sounded robotic, like a text-to-speech app coming from a phone. But I know for certain that it wasn't a phone, it was one of the students. I mustered up the courage to face the students. Their heads tilted forward and were staring at me more intensely than before. Where did Mr. Bennett stop? I asked nervously, panicking from the inside and glancing around the room for any way out. The room was filled with nothing but silence. No response. Nothing. My eyes turned to the windows. I swear that you could see the school entrance and the gate from here, but now, there was nothing. Just an endless patch of grass extending beyond my vision. I am trapped here. The clock on the wall has 20 minutes left until the class ends. The tables are filled with the same notebooks, open on the same page, and the kids are growing more and more unsettling to look at. It's as if I'm looking at predatorial hunger in their eyes. From a safe distance, I dared to look at one of the notebooks open on the desk. It read, "Mr. Morris teaches about the flavor of fear and helplessness." As I read this, I shook to my core. I didn't want to, but I continued reading past the title. Mr. Morris walks into the classroom to realize that we are not here, but in fact we are. He starts off by doubting our attendance and thinking it's a prank when in fact it is not. His smell of doubt helped us find our way to the classroom. He continues to grow in doubt and fear, reaches for the door, looks around for an escape. His fear and helplessness grows, my hunger grows. I stopped reading and instinctively pulled back as fast as I could. My body slammed roughly against the wall. My heart is beating out of my chest, and my eyes are hyper-fixated on any movement that may come from the students or anywhere in my peripheral vision. Their eyes opened even wider, a grin so atrocious filled their faces, and their hands were clawing the tables tightly. They all began to droll and stood up in the same manner and at the same time, all in perfect synchronization. I am beyond terrified and shaking. I can't move. I feel like a deer in headlights, and the car keeps approaching closer and closer and closer. My mouth can't muster up a sound, and I can feel the end of me coming. The students are approaching closer and closer, one small step at a time. Their faces are growing bigger and more grotesque with each step. Life is ending. I am going to die. Please, God, save me. Please, a miracle, anything. And then the bell rang. The kids that have gotten so close to me suddenly turned around for the door and opened it. They all left in the same robotic manner, exiting the door one by one without even turning their heads to look at me. The second I saw the last student leave, I ran for the door and never looked back. As far as I know now, the school is still open and there is a new job posting for a substitute teacher. If you ever come across one and are hired on the spot, do yourself a favor and run as quickly as possible and never return. This all started a few years ago, around 2023 to the beginning of 2024. When late one night as I was getting ready to go to sleep, my phone buzzed on my bedside table. As soon as I pick up my phone, I see a number I'm not familiar with or was familiar with. The text read, "Hey, I'm your number neighbor, and I figured I might want to see what my neighbor's doing, so how are you tonight?" I was a little shocked considering the fact that I never even thought I'd have one. I shrug it off as nothing and reply back with, "Well, I didn't even know I had a number neighbor." That was the only chat sent that night, so we never exchanged names or any information about each other. Fast forward a few weeks later, a text from the same number pops up on my phone saying, "How are you, Matt?" Seeing the text have my name in it, I was visibly getting tense. "Who is this?" "How do you know my name?" I reply. "It's quite rude to act that way towards a friend. Keep this up and you won't like the results you get." I bite my gums and block the number, hoping it'll all be over. Little did I know this would only be the beginning. It's the middle of July, somewhere around the 12th, when I started getting random packages and letters with no return address. The contents of the unexplained mail were strange, ranging from shards of glass, my name written in dried blood, items that remind me of childhood memories, some even being childhood toys that I'd lost years ago. I took the items to the police, but without a return address and no fingerprints coming back, there's nothing they could do. I started to install security cameras on every corner of my house. After I did this, the packages had stopped showing up for a while. Then they showed up to my work, my family members' houses, and even my daughter's dorm room, which was hours away at LSU. I thought about the number and what they could have meant by, "You won't like the results you get." Realizing what this meant, I immediately unblocked the number and sat for a minute contemplating whether or not to text it. In the midst of my contemplation, the number texts me. "Hey Matt, how'd you like the gifts? Pretty neat, huh? Also, those security cameras are pretty neat too. It'd be a shame if they were to be taken down." As soon as I read this, I heard the cameras being hit by something. It was strange though, because all four of them were being hit at the same time. I immediately ran to my basement and unlocked my gun safe, grabbing my newly bought Glock 17 and 12 gauge, tucking the Glock into my waistband and holding my 12 gauge to where I was ready to shoot anything that tried coming at me. I go to open my front door when the sound of broke glass erupts the house. I quickly turn around and see a group of masked men, about 7 of them all in different parts of the house, one in the kitchen, one on the stairs to the second floor, one on the stairs in the basement, 2 in the living room, another in my room, and one right behind me. I raise my shotgun and pull the trigger, click, click, sweat starts pouring down my face and tears fill my eyes. No, 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 no. I yell, as the man behind me puts a burlap sack over my fave and sticks a needle in my neck. I awoke inside a small shipping container in the middle of who knows where. I'm tied to a kitchen chair, my kitchen chair. My weapons sit against the wall next to the door. One of the men walk into the container with something in his hand. It's too dark for me to see, and tears fill my eyes again. The man walks up and he shoves a phone in my face. You know, maybe if you were a little bit nicer to me, we wouldn't be here. I'm sorry, just please let me go, I pleaded. The man chuckles to himself and slams the phone against the metal container walls, smashing it to pieces. Do you know who the fuck I am? He screams. No, just please let me go, I say with tears filling my lap. He pulls a gun out from behind his waistband, aims it at me, slowly points it to himself, and pulls the trigger. The sound of the gunshot and the thud of his dead body is enough to wake me up. Realizing it was all a nightmare, I get up to get a drink of water, and as I enter my room, I get a text from an unknown number. A few weeks ago, I started working as a night shift security guard for an old office building downtown. The place is mostly empty at night, just a few cleaning staff and the occasional late-working executive. The job seemed easy. Check the cameras, do an hourly patrol of the building, and make sure everything stays locked up. At first, the hardest part was staying awake. I'd sip coffee at my desk and glance at the cameras, which usually showed nothing but empty hallways. The building was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you notice every little sound. It was on my third night when I saw something strange. Around 3 a.m., the motion sensor in the west stairwell went off. The camera feed showed nothing, just an empty staircase. I figured it was a glitch. Sensors in older buildings can be finicky, but when I went to check it out, I found the stairwell door open. I was sure I'd locked it earlier during my rounds. I shrugged it off and locked the door again. Maybe one of the cleaning staff had used it and forgotten to close it. But when I asked the cleaners about it, they swore they hadn't gone near that stairwell. The following night, it happened again. Same time, same stairwell. This time, I didn't bother checking it out. I just locked the door remotely and made a note in my report. On my fifth night, things got weirder. I was reviewing the camera footage from earlier in the evening when I noticed something odd. At 2:47 a.m., the west stairwell camera showed the door slowly creaking open. No one was there. The hallway was empty, but as the door swung wide, the lights in the stairwell flickered just once. I rewound the footage and watched it again, and that's when I noticed it. Just before the lights flickered, a shadow passed across the bottom of the stairs. It was quick, like someone had darted just out of view of the camera. That was the first time I felt uneasy. The next night, I decided to do my rounds early, hoping to get ahead of whatever was going on. I started with the west stairwell, checking every door and corner. Everything was locked exactly as it should be, but when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I noticed something on the wall. Scratches. Long, deep marks running down the paint, as if someone had dragged their fingernails across it. I reported the scratches to my supervisor the next morning, but he just laughed. "It's an old building," he said. "These things happen." Last night was my breaking point. Around 3:15 a.m., I heard a noise, not through the cameras, but with my own ears. A low, rhythmic tapping like someone knocking on a door. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, coming from the direction of the west stairwell. I hesitated, my heart racing, then grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the noise. When I reached the stairwell, the tapping stopped. The door was open again, swinging gently on its hinges. The air in the stairwell was freezing, much colder than the rest of the building. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight down the stairs. That's when I heard it, a whisper. Faint, almost inaudible, coming from the bottom of the stairs. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, desperate. I froze, listening, and then the whisper stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I turned and left the stairwell, locking the door behind me. I didn't finish my rounds that night. Instead, I sat at the security desk staring at the monitors, waiting for my shift to end. I called out sick today. I'm not sure if I'm going back. I'm never bored. I never have been truly bored in my entire life, not that I can remember. Not really bored. Slightly bored, of course, but not properly bored because something always happens. I do everything I can to avoid situations when I might be bored. These days, with Facebook and Reddit, not allowing myself to become bored has become easier. But before that, I needed strategies. Notebooks, packs of cards, puzzle books. No matter where I was, I would always ensure I had something to do. It all started when I was about 11. I just started at a very British old-fashioned grammar school, with ancient buildings and equally antiquated teaching techniques and teachers. I don't really remember it starting, but during tedious lessons I would stare out of the window and usually there would be a squirrel playing, running around, digging holes, etc. As I headed to my second year at that school, age 12, the squirrels started to get more involved in lessons. During history, they would sword fight with twigs. During biology, they mated with a surprising degree of enthusiasm. I tried to tell people about it, but it was all put down to my overactive imagination, and I was told I would grow out of it. When my teachers caught me staring, they would close the blinds or move me to another desk. When that happened, pigeons would start to appear above the high window of my classroom and take over from the squirrels. There was a murmuration of starlings that would put on aerial displays above the skylight. One day, the murmuration shape even spelled my name in massive letters, but still noon believed me. This was all innocent, fun stuff, animals doing slightly odd but harmless things, and after a while I stopped talking about it. I didn't want to get bullied, and although the other kids saw some things, somehow they never really saw the fun stuff. I was a bit of a late developer, but eventually my voice broke and I had a much longed for growth spurt, and with it my boredom time changed. It started slowly enough. Firstly, the squirrels started fighting. Then a hawk appeared at the school. I'd grown out of sword-fighting squirrels, quarreling pigeons, and even starlings who could spell my name, and seeing nature, raw in tooth and claw, seemed cool. And that hawk, well, it liked to show me what an effective hunter it was. Then one day, my family were stuck in a traffic jam on the motorway. My dad said this looked like a bad one and it would last ages, possibly hours, and we sat scuriously moving. I looked out of the window, hoping to see something interesting. There was a fox on the hard shoulder across the road where the traffic was running in the other direction. It almost looked like it waited until it was sure I was looking. Then it casually strolled under the wheels of a passing van. I vividly remember its blood spraying all over a nearby car. I looked on in horror, as further up the road another fox appeared, and stared at me like it was waiting. This one didn't die instantly, it lay, screaming by the side of the road for what seemed like hours, until a passing lorry swerved and put it out of its misery. I don't recall the rest of that interminable day. The roadside casualties mounted, and I started to realize with horror that it was only when I was watching. At some point I realized I had to do something. I ran to the back of the car and got a book out of the back, which I read without looking up, and the casualties stopped. The traffic started moving soon afterwards. The final term at school was the worst. I had always found history tedious, but now there were workmen on scaffolding. After the first few unexpected accidents, a broken arm, then a broken leg, and then a brick falling on someone's head causing concussion even through his hard hat, I realized I couldn't look out of the window. I had to stay focused or just stare at my desk. To start with, that worked. That was until the entire scaffolding collapsed when I glanced up, after ages spent desperately staring at the floor and trying to count the number of times my teacher said, Once I finished school, things got better. I got a Walkman and I discovered talking books in the library. At the time, they were mainly for the blind, but the librarian let me borrow them. That plan lasted until a long train journey when the batteries in my Walkman died, and I finished my book. That day, a man in my carriage had a choking incident, and the automatic train door malfunctioned, so that it would keep hitting people until someone fell and broke their arm. Things got a bit better in my 20s. I met the woman who would become my wife, had 2 lovely kids, and I almost forgot about my boredom problems. That was until my son ended up in hospital. It was nothing major, but I had to stay with him with nothing to do. Once again, it started harmlessly. A Lego model a kid was working on collapsed onto him. Then a stray dog ran into the hospital, causing chaos. It seemed harmless, but I knew what was happening. After that, I took more care. I've had a few incidents over the years, each one slightly worse than the previous. I've seen car crashes and a train derailment, but it wasn't until I was nearly 40 that people started to die. The first was during a particularly tedious performance by my daughter's orchestral group, which had to be halted after their conductor had a cardiac arrest on stage. Over time, the deaths started to get more gruesome, and after that, they came closer to home. I witnessed a colleague get fatally hit by a car crossing the road near my office. Then a friend was trapped inside a burning car wreck, and then burned to death as I sat nearby, stuck on a stationary train. He shouldn't even have been in the area, but a road got flooded and he was diverted right past where my train was stopped. Not only do the incidents get worse, but somehow the world finds ways to trap me with nothing to do. Batteries die, trains and planes get delayed, drinks get spilled on my book, and the deaths keep getting closer. I've cut myself off from everyone I love. I've pushing my wife away, who took the kids with her, and I've moved deep into the countryside away from everyone. I dare not ever see my kids, or let my wife know how much I still love her. I keep myself constantly busy in my seclusion with manual tasks to ensure I sleep well, along with subscriptions to every streaming service and every talking book service I can. I keep 3 mobile phones fully charged at all times, each connected to a different network, just so I will always have something to do. The previous time all my strategies failed was 2 years ago. On that occasion, a small plane mistook the road for a runway, and the ensuing fireball killed a lot of people. And now I'm trapped again. During one of my rare trips to the local town to get the few supplies I can't get over the internet, I was involved in an accident. I don't know if that's part of what happens to me, or just bad luck. Now I'm lying here, in a hospital bed, with nothing to do, unable to move my head. So far, 6 people on my ward have died, with ever more bizarre causes, and now they've moved my bed near a window, where I can see planes taking off from the airport in the distance. I've tried not to look out of the window, but with my neck in a brace, I can't help it. There's nothing to do, no radio, no talking book, and I'm already getting bored. Hey everyone, I don't even know where to start with this. I woke up yesterday morning, what I thought was April 4th, feeling totally normal. It was around 8 a.m. and I did my usual thing. Washed my face, brushed my teeth, brewed my coffee. I don't check my phone until the caffeine kicks in, so it wasn't until I sat down with my mug that I noticed something wrong. My phone said January 4th, not April, January. My heart skipped a beat. I thought my phone had glitched or something, but then I looked at my whiteboard calendar in my room. It was filled in up to January and 4 days were already crossed out. At first I thought maybe I'd gotten the dates mixed up somehow, or I'd been sleep deprived for a few days, but 9 months? That's impossible, right? I started panicking. Did I black out the last 9 months of my life? I grabbed my phone and checked my group chats, servers, DMs, anything to piece things together. According to my messages, I'd been living my life like normal this entire time. But here's the thing. Some of the replies didn't sound like me. It wasn't glaringly obvious, just little things. Phrases I wouldn't use. Jokes that didn't feel like mine. I wrote it off at first, thought maybe I'd been having a rough patch mentally. Then I started noticing things in my room. My space looked like mine, but it didn't feel like it. My bed was made, but the sheets smelled like they'd been recently used, not fresh. My clothes, ones I hadn't worn in months, were missing from their usual spots in my closet. The drawers looked rummaged through, and some of my favorite outfits were lying in the laundry basket like they'd just been worn. Even my makeup bag had been disturbed. The products I rarely use were out of place, and my foundation bottle was nearly empty, even though I distinctly remember it being almost full the last time I used it. It felt like someone had been living in my room, using my things, but everything was just familiar enough to make me question my sanity. I checked my phone again, this time scrolling through my camera roll. I don't usually take many pictures or videos, so the sheer number of them was shocking. Hundreds, maybe thousands, photos of me, drunk selfies with friends, videos of me with my family and baby siblings, random stuff from college classes. Except it wasn't me. The girl in the photos looked similar to me, same hair color, same eye color, but there was something wrong with her. She smiled in most of the pictures, but the smile didn't feel real. Her eyes were too sharp, almost predatory. In some of the photos, she leaned in too close to my friends. Her grin stretched wide like she was in on a joke no one else knew. The videos were worse. In one, she looked directly at the camera for several seconds before laughing and turning away, as though she'd noticed someone, or something, just out of frame. Her voice was lighter, almost playful, but it had an edge to it like she was mocking whoever was recording. I started freaking out, like full-blown panic attack. I ran to my flatmate's room and begged them to help me. I explained everything, showed them the photos and videos of this random girl on my phone, but they just looked at me like I was losing it. They said the girl in the photos was me, that I've been here living with them, acting completely normal for the past 9 months. I couldn't believe them. I still don't. I called my mom thinking maybe she'd back me up, she'd know, right? But no, same thing. She said it's been me all along, that I've been coming over, talking to her, playing with my siblings. She didn't even sound worried. She thought I was just tired or stressed. But how can my own mom not recognize that this isn't me? How can my flatmate, my friends, my professors, everyone, be convinced this random girl is me? Where did she come from? Where did I go for 9 months? And here's the worst part. I don't know where she is now. She's gone. Disappeared, just like that. Is she watching me? Am I going to wake up tomorrow and have actually lost years to this random girl? I don't know what to do. I don't even know if I'm safe in my own skin anymore. If anyone has any ideas, or if you've heard of anything like this, please, I need help. I work at an animal shelter. I've had this job for about 2 months now, and it's going great, really. Dogs are my favorite animal, and I love playing with all the dogs that come into our shelter. Most of them are playful, fun, and happy, but some are not as fortunate, some are timid, angry, and not as social. I really feel bad for them. They have tragic backstories. My dream is to save different animals and help all the animals that come to our shelter. A few days ago, we got a new dog in. I was so excited to play with the new dog, but this one looked messed up. I know some of the dogs are strays, have been hurt or have injuries, but this dog looked weird not because of an injury, but because it had a smile that stretched ear to ear, with almost a human-like facial expression. Its eyes were so small, its mouth cut open, and it had weird paws that looked too much like hands. That is definitely a skinwalker, dude, my coworker whispers to me. What's a skinwalker, I ask. Later when I get home, I see an unread message. It's from my coworker. He sent me a video explaining what a skinwalker was. When I was about to sleep, I pulled out my phone, finally watching the video. The next morning, I felt extremely tired. Not because I was scared of that dog, even though I was, but because the video was 3 hours long. At least now I have a good understanding of what skinwalkers are. When I arrive at work today, I see the new dog's cage. It's massive, bigger than all the others, with a huge warning on the cage door, warning. Only staff members pass this point. I have never seen that sign on any other dog, at least not for no reason. The dog in question is a husky, with fluffy white fur, but disturbingly realistic facial features. Unfortunately, I have been tasked with going over to the dog and petting it. I slowly walk over to it, it's breathing heavily, and when I pet the husky's fur, I get chills. The dog's fur feels warm, wet, and not fluffy, almost like skin, like a reptilian animal. I try to slowly back away, but the dog gives me a menacing stare, smiling. I can't tell if it is smiling happily or horrifically. In the afternoon, we get 3 new dogs taken into the shelter. These ones look cute and fluffy. I can't wait to pet them. Later, it's confirmed they are all Pomeranians. I try to pet them, but I hear a loud howl. I get startled and try to look around and find the source of the sound. And all I can see is the husky staring at me, wide eyes, head banged up against the glass. Its eyes are even more distorted. They have a pink tint to them and are almost blank, a faded black pupil just visible beneath its eyes. My heart pounds when I receive news that I have to feed that weird husky. I slowly walk over to its cage, a plate of food in hand. I slowly unlock the cage door. I hear its weird, heavy breathing as soon as I do so, but something shocks me. I see blood dripping from the husky's stretched out mouth. I slowly lower the plate of food, but to my surprise, the dog isn't interested in the food I give him. I start to have some serious doubts if it is really a dog. But suddenly it looks at me, staring with a wide smile. Then it bites my hand with incredible force. "Ow, do!" I scream in a fit of rage. I try to grab the dog's mouth shut. Eventually, I get it back in its cage. That night, I try as hard as I can to fall asleep, but something doesn't feel right. I watch some more skinwalker videos, and video by video, it gets more and more like the dog at the shelter. After hours, I finally fall asleep, but am awoken by a strange howling noise. I'm terrified. I look out the window, and to my shock, there it is. The husky standing on 2 legs, its legs and arms thinner and outstretched. Its smile almost too uncanny. It has pointed ears and is so tall. I try to call the police, but I take another look at the dog and it just waves at me. I never understood how it escaped the animal shelter. Yeah, all right, Ma, loud and clear, your heart aches for a grandchild. I pulled the phone away from my ear and shot Camilla a wink as she paced into the kitchen. With a knowing smirk, my wife tiptoed over and leaned in to eavesdrop. The dishes could wait. A well-tread inside joke, Mom's ability to maintain a conversation with herself was legendary. Like a car with the brakes cut and a brick on the accelerator, unintelligible speech continued to cascade from the receiver, despite the lack of input on my end. Hand over her mouth to muffle a giggle, Camilla proceeded to the sink. With no more audience, I put the phone back to my ear and attempted to reinsert myself. Ma, listen. We're trying. We've been trying, and it'll happen when it happens. Love you too, bye. I slid the device onto the counter with one hand, using the other to massage my temple. A sigh billowed from my lips, forceful and involuntary like hot exhaust from a stalled engine. From her position in front of the running faucet, Camilla twisted her neck to meet my eyes, swinging wispy blonde curls over her shoulder blades. As two blue-white orbs locked onto me, my wife produced a wry grin and clicked her tongue. She's a real firecracker, that one. Don't know how your dad gets a word in edgewise. Oh, it's simple, he doesn't, I replied with a chuckle. Contented that she had dragged a laugh out of me, Camilla moved her head back to midline to focus on scrubbing the lasagna-stained cutlery. A surge of guilt churned in my stomach, and I stepped forward to rub her shoulders. She doesn't mean to harp on it, she's just really excited that the possibility is on the table. But I think Mom forgets how up and down your health can be, and that getting pregnant might not be as quick and easy as it was for her. On the edge of the V-shaped plot of skin revealed by her cherry-red sundress, I could see the outline of an implanted port. Camilla had been receiving infusions through the device since she was a teenager. I never got a straightforward answer to what exactly those infusions were, no matter how I asked the question. She didn't love talking about her condition, so I only knew the basics. Something to do with her immune system attacking her nerves. All things considered, being left in the dark about Camilla's health gave me a bit of nervous heartburn as her newly betrothed. That said, we'd been married for 2 short months and dated for only 5 months prior to that. Some would say our relationship is still in its infancy, despite its newfound legality. I figured if I expressed interest while also respecting her privacy, answers would surely follow down the line. A gleam of light reflected from something on her wrist, extracting me from thought. Oh, sweetheart, you didn't take off your watch. Let me get it for you. Don't want it to get waterlogged. As my hand approached the timepiece, her left hand shot up and out of the soapy water, darting to intercept me. Startled by the suddenness of the reaction, I jerked my palm away before it even contacted the accessory. As strange as that was, Camilla's facial expression was even stranger. She looked just as surprised by her actions as I did, her brow creased with an intense bewilderment. Slowly, she lifted her right arm out of the sink. Camilla rotated the extremity clockwise and then counterclockwise, gaze fixed on her watch, as if she was examining it for the first time. After a moment, her expression melted into one of cautious understanding. Right. I guess that makes sense. Rather than letting me remove her watch, she took it off herself, wrapping it delicately around the base of the faucet, noticeably out of reach from me. Never in my life have I met a woman more enraptured with what appeared to be a luxury wristwatch. I'm not a watch guy, so I'm assuming it's high-end. I mean, the damn thing stays on during sex. You'd think she had stapled the Hope diamond to her wrist based on how preciously she treats it. This made her casual attitude towards it getting wet even stranger. It's like her condition, I thought. I'll learn more in time. I just have to be patient. As I moved to retrieve my phone from the counter behind Camilla, my hip accidentally collided with her elbow. She winced in response. Oh, Camilla, I'm so sorry. My head's in the clouds. Have to watch where I'm going. Are you all right? I peered into the half-filled sink, fearing I'd witness a streak of crimson rise from the bottom of the basin like the beginning of an oil spill. Except there was no blood. Instead, I saw a stream of tiny bubbles gushing to the top of the reservoir, accompanied by a peculiar high-pitched noise that I had no explanation for. A muffled hiss was emanating from under the water, sharp and continuous. As Camilla dredged her injured wrist from the depths, she didn't scream. As the hissing became crystal clear, no longer dampened by the liquid's density, it didn't appear like she was in pain. What happened became apparent. When I sideswiped my wife, a small kitchen knife had punctured the underside of her wrist. But the laceration wasn't dripping with blood and plasma. Pressurized gas was escaping from the slit. Her hand flopped limply downwards as she held it in front of her, like a latex glove that was being carried by the collar. Inch by inch, more of her arm melted into a gelatinous cast of its previous shape. The backdraft rushing from the aperture appeared more like smoke than air, viscous and thick rather than transparent. Paralyzed by the hallucinatory scene, I generously inhaled the vapors. They were hot and acrid, searing the inside of my mouth and nostrils. The pain knocked me backwards into the fridge door, and I swiped at the fog surrounding me like I was being assailed by a swarm of bees. By then, her entire arm was flaccid and held at her side, flattened digits just barely able to touch the tile floor. Camilla observed the ongoing deflation of her extremity, the dead serpent that was now grafted onto her shoulder, with an alarming indifference. She tilted her head up, with her blue-white irises once again locking onto mine. There was no panic in her features. At most, Camilla exhibited a passing curiosity, a furrowed brow with a contemplative glint shining behind her eyes. The emotional dissonance was violently uncanny. Her face then began to involute, with her nose the first feature to plummet into the developing crater. It was like the front of her skull was being struck by an invisible cannonball, with the progressing concavity distorting her visage into something wholly unrecognizable. Bile leaped up the back of my throat as her head crumpled into a bouquet of rubbery flesh sprouting from her collarbone. Her chest then folded into her abdomen. With a final crescendoing hiss, the last of my wife evaporated into a chaotic mound of elastic tissue and empty clothes on the kitchen floor. I'm not sure what I did once the room became silent. I may have screamed, I may have wept, I may have done nothing at all, instead electing to wait patiently for this fever dream to break. What I remember next is the voice on the other end of my cell phone asking if I needed emergency services. I don't recall saying anything to the 911 dispatcher, but I must have, because she informed me that the police were on their way. The phone abruptly vibrated, the sensation somehow reaching into the ether to grasp my soul and force it back into my person. I gasped loudly. With dread and adrenaline dancing in my veins, I examined the screen. Camilla was calling. Every cell in my body buzzed with furious anxiety. From where I was standing, I could see her phone, face up and to the left of the sink. It read "Hubby" on the outgoing call screen. Unsure of what other options were available to me, I answered the call. "Cam, is that... Hey, love. Could you kindly pick me up off the floor?" And the cheery sing-song voice that trickled from the speaker was my breaking point. I threw my phone from my hand with all the ferocity I could muster. It crashed against the side of our apartment's oven, its screen becoming black and dead instantly. In the brief silence that followed, a bluish glow caught my attention. Somewhere within Camilla's shed exoskeleton, a tiny silver firefly had whirred to life. I cautiously stepped forward, trying to determine where in her molt the light originated. Using a spatula, I pushed a layer of folded abdominal skin out of the way to reveal the source. Her port. As I examined the implant, it blinked 3 times, which was followed by a small droplet of light spinning around its edge. In response, Camilla's phone activated once more. It was attempting to connect again with my newly destroyed cell phone. My spine straightened, and my hand involuntarily released the spatula, causing it to clatter against the floor. I digested the nightmarish ordeal with a glacial slowness, observations thawing into realizations only after an excruciatingly long amount of time. Whatever that implant was, it wasn't just a catheter, if it was even a catheter at all. A set of knuckles wrapped against the outside of our apartment door. "Police here to perform a wellness check. Is anyone there?" shouted a gruff male voice. I felt my mind writhe and fracture, practically atomizing under the crushing weight of my current uncertainty and indecision. How can I possibly explain this? Is he going to think I skinned my wife? Am I going to jail? That was quick. Is he actually the police? What if he's someone the port called? Through blistering vertigo, I replied, "I'm okay, one moment, be right there." Finally mobilized by fear, I stood over Camilla. It was nearly impossible to tell what parts of her were where in the mess. I wanted to avoid pulling her by her face, but the absurdity of that concern hit me like a freight train on second thought. It didn't matter where I anchored my grasp. I just needed to start pulling. Centering myself with a breath, I bent over and seized a leathery chunk in each hand. Despite being reduced to human taffy, my wife still weighed as much as she did when she was alive. If she was ever truly alive, I thought. Thankfully, her skin slid softly over my kitchen's terrain. I prayed that whoever was on the other side of that door couldn't hear the quiet squishing that I was unfortunately privy to. Piled haphazardly in the darkest corner of the room, I draped a navy blue peacoat over the puddle that used to resemble my wife. I then moved to open the door. The burly man standing on the other side seemed like a police officer. He at least had the uniform. "We got a 911 hang-up from this address not too long ago. Everything all right in there, son?" I tried to adopt a disarming smile, but my facial muscles wouldn't fully cooperate. The expression that resulted did me no favors. A disjointed schizophrenic smirk manifested above my chin, the corners of my mouth becoming tremulous thorns that refused to act in synchrony. "Yes, I had some chest pains. They're gone now." He scanned me from head to toe, no doubt looking for probable cause. I fought back visions of Camilla appearing behind me, dragging herself into view with a deflated hand. After what felt like hours of silent inspection, he spoke again. "Next time, call us back if it turns out you're doing okay." The officer hesitated on how to phrase the end of his sentence. I was in dire straits, and he could tell just by looking at me. Distress, however, was not illegal. I gave him an unconvincing nod, and he walked away. When I could no longer hear the clinking of his gun holster and the dull thuds of his boots against the ground, I locked the door. Resting my forehead against the wood of the frame, I let myself briefly dissociate. Before long, however, anxiety began to bubble at the base of my skull, forcing me to confront reality. With every ounce of my being, I prayed to turn the corner and find no navy blue peacoat cloaking something large and amorphous in my kitchen, which would confirm my developing psychosis. Insanity was preferable to this hellscape. Camilla could at least visit me in a sanatorium. Faintly, I could see the outline of that silver firefly under a heap of fabric and skin, and I accepted that I would have no such luck. It took me about 30 minutes to heave Camilla into the confines of our walk-in closet. Primarily, I focused my energy on the task at hand, as opposed to theorizing about the meaning of it all. There would be time for that later. Right now, she needed to be hidden from view. Once I had her sequestered, however, I couldn't help but examine Camilla. The impossibly surreal nature of her transformation helped me cope with and detach from the circumstances to some degree. This wasn't my wife, the woman I had fallen hopelessly in love with. This was some cruel oddity, an intense and extreme prank. It was Salvador Dali's horrific reinterpretation of Camilla, not the flesh and blood woman herself. These thoughts helped, but only to a point. The portion I couldn't reconcile was her face. From where she lay congealed in the back of the closet, the right half of her face was visible. Her features were still taut but slightly withered, like a weathered Halloween mask. The crease at her nose hid the rest of her face from me, existing somewhere deeper inside the pile. Even though it now appeared like a wintry marble stitched into high-quality latex, her right eye seemed to track my movements, watching my every step. I didn't think she was actually watching me. Camilla's hollow cadaver had not moved an inch since its deflation. I thought I had killed her. That said, I couldn't absorb her gaze, even if she was dead. Her glassy right eye inspired a skittering, burning madness in my soul that threatened to dissolve me completely if I allowed the flames to rise unabated. I covered her limp, vacant half-face with a t-shirt and resumed my inspection. There were two, for lack of a better word, sacks fixed on the inside of Camilla. Circular outlines that clearly had their own internal space. One appeared to be located under her chest, and the second appeared to be located under her upper abdomen. A heart and a stomach, maybe. Next, I ran my fingertips along the length of the right arm. Her shell was sturdy and firm, like thick plastic, save the underside of her wrist, which had more of a silky consistency. Maybe the area served a ventilatory purpose, but then what about the watch? Leaving the closet, I locked the doors behind me and checked the timepiece that was still hanging at the base of the tap. When I placed the obsidian strap up to a light bulb, sure enough, it seemed to be equipped with thousands of tiny holes. Protective, porous metal, I theorized. As I lingered in front of the sink, my detachment from the situation abruptly waned. Standing where she had only a few hours ago, The floodgates' destruction was inevitable. I thought of her laugh, her smile, her empathy, and her kindness, causing bitter tears to fall softly into the basin. Then, in a flash, I reconsidered our entire relationship. Was she once human and then someone replaced her with a near-perfect replica? Was she always like this? What does she want from me? A crack of thunder detonated from somewhere deeper in the apartment. My heart swam, trying to remain afloat in a new deluge of liquid terror. The closet door had slammed against the top of the frame. Initially, I couldn't determine the mechanics of what had transpired and caused the noise. Then I saw it. Or rather, I saw her. Under the doorframe. Camilla, a sentient lake of skin, was squeezing herself under the closet door. However she was moving, it involved bouts of propulsion that generated enough power to splinter the edges of the resilient wooden door as it collided with its frame. Another 3 booms occurred in rapid succession, and then she was free. Her method of transportation was beyond uncanny. It was mind-shatteringly alien. Camilla's gait would start with hundreds of spikes materializing under her, their birth thrusting her tissue upward. She would then hang briefly in the air, giving the appearance of a giant, flesh-toned soccer cleat. The mass of skin would then tilt forward, momentum causing Camilla to fall a few inches in her intended direction, reabsorbing the spikes in the process. The cycle would then restart, a full rotation taking only about 3 seconds. Gradually, Camilla was hobbling down the hall and towards me. Defeated, my body slumped to the kitchen floor. I leaned against the cabinet below the sink, awaiting whatever was to follow, but Camilla passed by me. Her intended destination was, apparently, the guest bedroom. It did not take her long to get there. From behind where I was sitting, I could hear her ramming against something, repetitive thuds emanating from the room. It took me a while to reconnect my muscles to my nerves, their connections transiently severed by the recent torrent of caustic horror. When I was able, I followed Camilla into the guest bedroom. She was struggling to open a drawer present on the bed frame, incapable of melding her flesh around the knob to pull it open. Camilla's face wasn't visible from my vantage point, instead submerged somewhere within herself. She could still sense me, however. Her attempt stopped once I entered the room. She tumbled backwards and remained still, wordlessly asking for help. I stepped forward, internally bracing myself for Camilla to pounce on and consume me. But she never did. When I pulled the drawer open, I understood. Our air mattress was inside, which included a detachable motor designed to inflate the bed. I haven't managed to reform Camilla, not yet, but I'm getting closer. The motor could partially inflate her, but it's not powerful enough to pressurize her completely. I'm desperate for answers, but our communication so far has been limited. She can't speak while she's deflated. It seems like Camilla can whisper when she's partially inflated, but only weakly, and I could not hear her over the motor. Her port, whatever it is, can use Camilla's phone to call other lines, but it apparently cannot act as a phone by itself. And my phone, unfortunately, remains broken. Maybe I'll try reading her lips later today. Or I'll go to a payphone and have her call me there. My planning was interrupted when I felt Camilla's phone vibrate in my pocket. It was an incoming call from my mom's number, probably reaching out to my wife after being unable to reach me. Her call was the catalyst to a series of epiphanies. She was the one who introduced me to Camilla. I assumed the sacs inside of my wife were a stomach and a heart, but she has no blood, so maybe she doesn't need a heart, maybe it's a stomach and a uterus. My mom has been obsessed with receiving a grandchild. When I answered the call, I shouted my initial query before she could wind herself up. "Hey Mom, where did you say you met Camilla again?" Dead air came back as her response. Maybe she could hear the motor running in the background, or maybe it was just something in my voice that implied what I knew. Either way, she was stunned. I could hear her breathing on the other line, but seconds later she still had said nothing. Mom may be a chatterbox, but she's a terrible poker player. She's only truly silent when she's manufacturing a lie. I found my missing brother on a forum for the dead. I never thought much about online forums until one of them brought my brother back. Ryan had been missing for 2 years. One day he went out to grab coffee and never came back. No suspicious activity on his bank account, no weird phone calls, no signs of struggle, just gone. The police said he'd likely been abducted, but without evidence they couldn't do much. My family fell apart. My mom stopped eating. My dad stopped talking. And I just stopped feeling. Late one night, while spiraling through forums about unsolved disappearances, I stumbled upon a thread titled Messages from Beyond, Connecting with the Lost. It was buried deep within an obscure corner of the internet and full of people claiming to receive messages from the dead. It sounded ridiculous, but one comment caught my attention. A user named Echoing Void posted, "Sometimes the missing don't know they're gone. Sometimes they're here looking for home." Below, someone replied, "How do you know?" And Void answered, "Because I am one." For whatever reason, grief, desperation, or lack of sleep, I created an account and messaged Void. I typed, "If you're really one of the missing, prove it. Tell me something only you would know." The response came within minutes. "What do you want me to prove? That you once broke Ryan's nose during a stupid fight over a game of Mario Kart? That he forgave you before you forgave yourself?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone about that, not even my parents. It was just one of those childhood moments you carry like a secret scar. I asked, "Who are you?" Void's reply, "I think you know." The next few weeks were a blur. I spent hours every night talking to Void. He said the world he was in was a fractured reflection of ours, familiar but empty. The sky was always gray, the streets abandoned, the air heavy with silence. He couldn't explain how he got there, only that he woke up in this place and couldn't leave. The more we talked, the more he sounded like Ryan. He even remembered details no one else could, like the nickname he used to call our childhood dog, or how he'd secretly taped my embarrassing middle school dance recital to blackmail me later. One night, Void said something that terrified me. He typed, "They're watching me now. They don't like that I'm talking to you." I asked who they were, but his responses became cryptic. "The shadows. The ones who keep us here. They don't like noise." That was the last I heard from him for weeks. Then a new message appeared in my inbox. "Do you want to see me?" Attached was a link to a live video feed. I hesitated but clicked. The stream showed a dimly lit street that looked eerily like the one Ryan and I grew up on. The houses were distorted, their shapes wavering as if viewed through heat haze. In the distance, a figure walked toward the camera. As they drew closer, I recognized his face. It was Ryan. But something was off. His eyes were too wide, his movements stiff, like a puppet on strings. He smiled at the camera, but it wasn't the smile I remembered. It was forced, unnatural. He raised a hand and waved. In the live chat beside the video, he typed, "It's me. I told you I was here." I couldn't move. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. Suddenly, the camera shook violently. The shadows behind Ryan began to shift and ripple, forming towering figures with jagged edges. They moved closer, their distorted limbs reaching for him. Ryan typed, "They're coming. You have to help me. Find the door." The feed cut out. I spent the next few days piecing together everything he'd said about his world, looking for clues about the door. It wasn't much, but he'd mentioned a specific place from our childhood, an old, abandoned cabin in the woods where we used to play. I drove there, half expecting nothing. The cabin was just as we'd left it, rotting and overgrown. Inside, I found a trapdoor beneath a threadbare rug. The ladder below led to a tunnel that stretched on for what felt like miles. At the end was a heavy iron door with strange carvings. As I touched it, my phone buzzed. A message from Void. "They know you're here. Don't let them in." Before I could reply, the shadows began to seep through the walls, crawling toward me like living tar. I shoved the door open and stepped through. I don't know how to explain what happened next. One moment I was in the tunnel. The next I was standing in the gray, empty world Ryan had described. The air was heavy, the silence deafening. And there he was, standing a few feet away, staring at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Ryan," I whispered. But before he could respond, the shadows surged forward. The last thing I remember is his scream. I woke up in my bed the next morning, clutching a piece of paper I'd never seen before. Written on it in Ryan's handwriting were the words, "Don't stop looking. There's another door."